For 4 years, my daughter-in-law sent me photos of my son standing on balconies overlooking the desert sands of Dubai. She told me he was leading a team of engineers building the future too busy to call but always sending his love. I believed her because a father wants to believe his son is soaring. I was so proud that I drained my savings account every month to support their vision. Then a stranger at the farmer's market handed me a dirty package wrapped in black electrical tape. Inside wasn't a souvenir from the Middle East. It was a dirty, crumpled receipt from a facility just 20 miles down the highway and a burner phone with one terrifying unsent message. My son wasn't in Dubai. He was in hell and the devil was driving the Mercedes I paid for. My name is Reginald Carter, but everyone in the neighborhood just calls me Reggie. I am 72 years old, a retired postmaster who spent 30 years ensuring that every letter reached its destination. I thought I knew how to read people like I used to read zip codes, but it turns out the blindest man is the one who refuses to see the snake in his own garden. Before I open this package and show you the horror that changed my life, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you believe that a parent's job never ends no matter how old your children get. It was a Tuesday morning in Atlanta, the kind of humid day that makes your shirt stick to your back the moment you step onto the porch. I was at the open-air market on the west side picking out peaches. I remember thinking about making a cobbler the way my late wife used to make, hoping maybe this was the week Nash would finally come home for a visit. Tiffany, his wife, had told me his project was wrapping up. She was always the one who gave me updates. Nash was always in a meeting or on a site visit or the signal was bad. For 4 years, I had accepted the silence as the price of his success. I was weighing a bag of fruit when I felt a presence behind me. It wasn't a casual shopper. It was close, urgent. I turned around and saw Dante. He was a young man from the neighborhood, a delivery driver for one of those private courier companies. I had known Dante since he was a kid stealing apples from my tree, but today he looked terrified. He was wearing his brown uniform, but his cap was pulled low and his eyes were darting left and right, as if he expected the police to jump out from behind the vegetable stands. "Mr. Carter, don't look at me," he whispered, his voice trembling. He jammed a heavy rectangular object wrapped in thick black tape into my shopping bag right on top of the peaches. "Keep walking. Just keep walking." "Dante, what is this?" I asked, my instincts from my days working security before the Postal Service kicking in. "It is for you," he hissed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I delivered a package to a place called Shady Oaks yesterday. A patient threw this out the window into my truck bed when the guards weren't looking. He yelled your name. He said you were the only one who could read the code." I frowned, gripping his arm. "What patient? Who are you talking about?" Dante pulled away, looking over his shoulder at a black SUV slowly cruising down the street. "It was Nash, Mr. Carter. It was your son. He is not in Dubai. He never was. Open that when you are alone. Do not let her see it." Before I could ask who she was, though, I already felt a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Dante disappeared into the crowd. I stood there, the sounds of the market fading into a buzz. The package in my bag felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My son, Nash, here in Atlanta. It didn't make sense. Just yesterday, Tiffany had sent me a photo of him at a gala dinner holding a champagne glass. I drove home with one eye on the rear-view mirror. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I live in a modest 3-bedroom house that I bought 40 years ago, a house I had refinanced twice in the last 4 years to send money to Tiffany. She told me their assets were frozen due to international banking laws, and they needed liquidity to keep Nash's business afloat. I had given them everything. My retirement fund, my rainy day savings. I even sold the plot of land in South Georgia that had been in the Carter family for 3 generations. All for Nash. All for his future. I locked the front door and engaged the deadbolt. I pulled the curtains in the living room, plunging the house into a dim, dusty twilight. My hands were shaking so bad I had to use a kitchen knife to slice through the layers of black tape. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the smell of expensive cologne or desert spice. It was the smell of rubbing alcohol, stale tobacco, and fear. Inside the tape was a cheap plastic Nokia phone, the kind you buy at a gas station for $20. It was battered, the screen cracked. Taped to the back of the phone was a piece of paper folded into a tiny square. I unfolded the paper first. It was a billing invoice. The header read, "Shady Oaks Assisted Living and Psychiatric Care." I squinted at the address. It was in Decatur, a rundown suburb just 30 minutes from here. I scanned the list of charges. It wasn't a hotel bill. It was a list of nightmares. Heavy sedation fee, restraint usage daily, high-risk patient monitoring. And there at the bottom was the patient's name. Nash Carter. The date on the invoice was from 3 days ago. My knees gave out and I sank onto the sofa. My boy. My brilliant, ambitious boy who had graduated with honors, who had dreams of building bridges and skyscrapers. He wasn't building anything. He was being billed for restraints and sedation. I picked up the phone. The battery icon was flashing red. It had maybe 2% life left. There were no contacts saved, no call history, just one unsent text message in the drafts folder. My thumb hovered over the button. I was afraid. I was more afraid in that moment than I had ever been in my life. I pressed open. The message was short, written in broken English, likely typed in a hurry or under the influence of heavy drugs. Dad. Help. She injects me. Cannot walk. She says you are dead. She says you hate me. If you get this, do not come to the front door. She has power of attorney. Trap. Love you. The phone died in my hands, the screen going black. I sat there in the silence of my living room, the air conditioner humming a low, indifferent tune. Tears streamed down my face, hot and angry. She told him I was dead. That woman I had welcomed into my home, treated like a daughter, cooked Sunday dinners for. Tiffany. With her blonde hair and her soft voice and her stories about how much she missed Nash, she had looked me in the eye, eaten my food, and taken my money, all while keeping my son a prisoner less than 20 miles away. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the doorbell. It rang 3 times, cheerful and impatient. Then came the knocking. Dad. Dad, are you home? It is me, Tiffany. My blood ran cold. I looked at the burner phone and the invoice on the coffee table. I grabbed them and shoved them deep between the couch cushions. I wiped my face with my sleeve, trying to erase the terror and the rage. I had to be an actor. I had to be the dumb, trusting old man she thought I was. I walked to the door and opened it. Tiffany stood there radiant in a white summer dress, holding a designer handbag that probably cost more than my car. She was smiling, that wide, perfect smile that didn't quite reach her ice blue eyes. She held up an iPad in her manicured hand. Surprised, she squealed, pushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. Nash just FaceTimed me from the hotel in Dubai. The connection is a little spotty, but he really wanted to say hello to his daddy. Come on, look. She thrust the screen into my face. I looked. On the screen was a video of my son. He looked healthy. He was wearing a crisp suit, standing on a balcony with a blurred cityscape behind him. He was waving. Hi, Dad, the voice from the iPad said. Miss you. Work is great. Send money if you can. The investors are being difficult. Love you. It looked real. If I hadn't just held that invoice, if I hadn't just read that text message, I would have believed it. But now, looking closely, I saw it. The movement of his mouth didn't perfectly match the audio. His eyes looked vacant, dead. And the shirt he was wearing. It was a blue Oxford shirt with a small coffee stain on the collar. I remembered that stain. He had spilled coffee on it at Thanksgiving dinner. 5 years ago. This was a recording. Or worse, a deepfake. Isn't he looking great? Tiffany chirped, pulling the iPad back before I could look too closely. She sat down on my sofa, right on top of the cushion where I had hidden the evidence. She crossed her legs and looked up at me, her expression shifting from cheerful to calculating. By the way, Dad, she said, her voice dropping an octave. Nash mentioned that the wire transfer for this month hasn't come through yet. Is there a problem with the bank? You know we can't let the project stall now. We are so close to bringing him home. I looked at her. I looked at the monster sitting in my living room asking for my last dime while my son rotted in a cell. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her by her expensive hair and drag her out. But I heard Dante's voice in my head. Do not let her see it. I forced my lips into a smile. It felt like cracking stone. No problem at all, Tiffany, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I was just heading to the bank this afternoon. But first, I think I need to use the restroom. My stomach is a little upset. Take your time, she said, relaxing back into the cushions. I will wait right here. I walked down the hallway, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I wasn't going to the bathroom. I was going to the back bedroom where I kept my old service revolver in a locked box. But as I passed the kitchen, I saw the reflection in the microwave door. Tiffany wasn't just sitting there. She was digging. She was sliding her hand between the couch cushions. She had found the phone. I stared at the iPad screen, forcing my face to remain a mask of calm curiosity, while my insides twisted into a knot of pure rage. On the screen, my son Nash was smiling that familiar, warm smile. He waved at the camera, the Dubai skyline shimmering in the heat behind him. "Hi, Dad," the digital version of my son said, his voice tinny and slightly out of sync with his lips. "I hope you are taking your medicine. Things are great here, just busy. We are building the future." Tiffany leaned in closer, her perfume a scent of expensive vanilla and lies clogging my throat. "See?" she cooed, tapping the screen with a long manicured fingernail. "He looks so happy, doesn't he? He is finally the man you always wanted him to be, Reggie. A big shot. A success." I nodded slowly, my eyes locked on the video loop. I watched it a second time, and then a third. Tiffany thought I was just an old man missing his boy drinking in the image. But I was looking at something else. I was looking at the collar of his shirt. It was a faded navy blue polo with a small embroidered logo of a golf club. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Nash hated golf. He had only worn that shirt once 4 years ago at a company picnic for his old engineering firm in Atlanta. I remembered it because he had spilled barbecue sauce on the left shoulder. And despite my late wife's best efforts with stain remover, a faint reddish shadow remained. And there it was, on the screen in high definition, the faint reddish shadow on the left shoulder. This wasn't a live call from Dubai. This was a video from 4 years ago, possibly edited, possibly deep-faked, but definitely not live. My son wasn't in the Middle East. He was wearing a shirt that had likely been thrown in a donation bin years ago. "That is wonderful, Tiffany," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "He looks healthy." "He is," she said, snapping the iPad cover shut, cutting off the image of my son. "But living over there is expensive, Dad. The cost of living in Dubai has skyrocketed. Nash is too proud to ask, but he needs a little bridge loan, just until the project bonus clears next month." A bridge loan. The words echoed in my head, mocking me. For 4 years, I had been the bridge. Every single month on the 1st, I walked into the bank and wired $4,000 to an account Tiffany controlled. $4,000. That was my pension. That was the profit from selling my truck. That was the money from the sale of the 40 acres of timberland in South Georgia that my grandfather, a sharecropper, had bought with blood and sweat in 1930. I had sold our legacy, sold the soil that held my ancestors' sweat because Tiffany told me Nash was in trouble with local investors in Dubai. I looked at her diamond earrings. I looked at the new Lexus key fob sitting on my coffee table. I hadn't been funding my son's business. I had been funding her lifestyle. I had been paying for her manicures, her brunches, and her secrets while my son was rotting somewhere with a burner phone and a plastic invoice. I stood up, my knees cracking audibly. "I need to get my checkbook," I lied. "It is in the study." "But Tiffany, I am feeling very tired today. The doctor says my heart needs rest. If I write you a check for $5,000 today, can you handle the deposit yourself and let me nap?" Her eyes lit up. The greed was naked, ugly, and undeniable. "Of course, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You rest. I will take care of everything. I always do." I walked to my study, wrote a check that I knew would bounce because I had frozen the account 10 minutes ago on my phone while in the bathroom, and handed it to her. She kissed my cheek, a kiss that felt like a brand of shame, and left. As soon as her SUV pulled out of the driveway, the mask fell off. I didn't nap. I went to war. I pulled the crumpled invoice out from the couch cushions. My hands were steady now. The shock had passed, replaced by a cold, hard determination that I hadn't felt since my days managing the chaotic Christmas rush at the main post office. I grabbed my magnifying glass and examined the document. Shady Oaks Assisted Living and Psychiatric Care. I went to my computer and typed the name into the search bar. The results that came up made my stomach turn. It wasn't a hospital. It was a warehouse for the unwanted. 2 stars on Google. News articles from 3 years ago about a state investigation regarding patient neglect over sedation and billing fraud. It was a place where families dumped their inconvenient relatives when they wanted to forget they existed. And the address. It wasn't in a medical district. It was in an industrial park on the edge of town, sandwiched between a scrap metal yard and a derelict chemical plant. I grabbed my keys. I didn't take my sedan. I went to the garage and uncovered my old Ford pickup, the one I hadn't driven in months. It was rusted loud and looked like trouble, exactly what I needed. I grabbed the tire iron from the toolbox and placed it on the passenger seat. The drive took 40 minutes. As I left my quiet, tree-lined suburb, the scenery began to change. The manicured lawns gave way to cracked pavement, chain-link fences, and buildings with boarded-up windows. The sun was setting, casting long, angry shadows across the road. I pulled up a block away from the address on the invoice. Shady Oaks didn't look like a care facility. It looked like a prison. It was a single-story brick building surrounded by a 10-foot fence topped with razor wire. There were no trees despite the name, just concrete and despair. I pulled my cap low and walked toward the perimeter. The front gate was locked, monitored by a camera that looked like it had been broken since the 90s. I walked around the side through the tall weeds and trash until I found a spot where the ground had eroded beneath the fence. I crouched down, ignoring the pain in my joints, and peered through the chain links. The back of the building had a row of small barred windows. Most were dark, but just one had a flickering light. I squinted, trying to adjust my eyes to the gloom. Inside that room I saw a wheelchair, and in that wheelchair sat a man. He was slumped forward, his chin resting on his chest. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a gray hospital gown that hung loosely on his frame. His arms were thin, too thin, skeletal. And his wrists, my God. His wrists were strapped to the armrests with thick leather belts. The man lifted his head slowly, as if the movement cost him every ounce of energy he had left. The light from the flickering bulb caught his face. It was a face I had washed when he was a baby. A face I had watched shave for the first time. A face I had kissed on his wedding day. It was Nash. But it wasn't the Nash from the video. This Nash had hollow cheeks, dark circles under his eyes, and a beard that was matted and gray. He looked like a man who had been screaming for years in a room where no one listened. He turned his head toward the window, his eyes unfocused, glazed over. He mouthed something. I couldn't hear him through the glass in the distance, but I knew what he was saying. I felt it in my bones. Dad. I gripped the cold metal of the fence until my knuckles turned white. My son wasn't building the future in Dubai. He was being rotted alive in a brick box in Atlanta, funded by his own father's life savings. I turned to run back to my truck to ram the gate, to tear the building down with my bare hands if I had to. But then I saw movement in the corner of the yard. A large man in a security uniform was walking the perimeter, swinging a heavy flashlight. He was heading straight for the window where Nash was sitting. I froze in the shadows, holding my breath. If I acted now, if I made a scene, they would move him, they would hide him, or worse, they would silence him forever. I needed a plan, I needed backup, and I needed to know exactly who was running this house of horrors before I kicked the door down. I slowly backed away, my eyes never leaving my son's silhouette. I made a promise to the cold night air. I am coming back, son, and God help anyone who stands in my way. As I started the engine of my truck, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank. The check I gave Tiffany had just been presented for deposit via mobile app. She hadn't even waited to get home. She was that hungry. Good, I whispered, shifting the truck into gear. Let her think she has won. Let her think the old man is asleep, because when I wake up there won't be anywhere on this earth she can hide. I drove into the night, the image of my son's strapped wrists burning a hole in my memory. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a hunter. And the season had just opened. I pulled my truck up to the main gate of Shady Oaks, the headlights cutting through the gloom like two accusatory fingers. The sign above the entrance was missing a few letters, buzzing with a dying neon hum that sounded like a trapped fly. I didn't bother parking in a designated spot. I left the engine running, grabbed my tire iron not to use it but to let them know I wasn't just a visitor. I was a problem. I marched toward the security booth. Inside sat a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and bad decisions. He was watching a portable TV, ignoring the world outside. I slammed my hand against the plexiglass. "Open the gate," I shouted, my voice rasping with the kind of anger that sits deep in your chest. "I am here for Nash Carter. I am his father." The guard didn't jump. He didn't even look surprised. He slowly turned his head, chewing on a toothpick, and slid a window open just an inch. "Visiting hours are over, Pop," he said, his voice flat and bored. "Come back between 2 and 4 on Thursday." "I am not visiting," I growled, leaning in until my breath fogged the glass. "I have reason to believe my son is being held against his will. I have reason to believe he is being medically abused. Now you open this gate or I call the police and we tear this place apart brick by brick." The guard chuckled a dry, humorless sound. He reached down to a clipboard that was already sitting on the counter, as if he had been waiting for me. As if this was a script they had rehearsed. "Go ahead and call the cops, Mr. Carter," he said, reading my name off the paper before I had even said it. "But before you do, you might want to look at this." He slid a document through the slot. It wasn't a visitor log. It was a court order. I snatched the paper, holding it up to the dim light of the street lamp. The header hit me like a physical blow. Temporary restraining order. Plaintiff Nash Carter. Defendant Reginald Carter. My hands shook as I read the legal jargon. It claimed that I, Reginald Carter, had a history of violent outbursts, that I was financially exploiting my son, and that my presence caused him significant emotional distress. It stated that I was to remain 500 yards away from Nash Carter at all times. "This is a lie," I yelled, spitting the words at the glass. "My son didn't write this. He loves me. He sent me a message begging for help." "Look at the bottom," the guard said, pointing a thick finger at the signature line. I looked, and that is when my heart broke all over again. There was a signature there. It read Nash Carter. But it wasn't the bold, confident loop I had seen on his college diploma. It wasn't the sharp, professional scrawl he used on his engineering blueprints. It was a shaky, trailing line. The ink pooled in spots where the pen had rested too long, as if the hand holding it had no strength, no will. It was the signature of a man who was barely conscious, a man who had a pen shoved into his hand and was guided by someone else. "He was drugged," I whispered, staring at the jagged lines. "You drugged him to get this." "I don't know nothing about that," the guard said, sliding the window shut. "I just know that if you don't get that truck off this property in 3 minutes, I am authorized to call the sheriff and have you arrested for violating a court order. And given your age, pop jail might be hard on your health." I stood there for a long moment, the tire iron heavy in my hand. I wanted to smash the window. I wanted to tear the gate off its hinges. But I knew that was exactly what Tiffany wanted. She wanted me arrested. She wanted me in a cell so she could finish whatever sick game she was playing. If I got locked up tonight, Nash would be alone. I glared at the guard, memorizing his face, memorizing the badge number pinned to his chest. "This isn't over," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Keep that paperwork safe. You are going to need it for your own lawyer." I turned and walked back to my truck, the paper crumbling in my fist. I threw the tire iron onto the passenger seat and reversed out of the driveway, my tires screeching against the asphalt. I couldn't go home. Home was compromised. Home was where Tiffany could find me, where she could stage another scene. I needed a war room, and I needed a soldier who knew how to fight in the mud. I drove toward the south side of the city, to a neighborhood that most folks locked their doors when driving through. I pulled up to a small yellow house with peeling paint and a porch cluttered with old newspapers. This was the home of Elijah "Smoke" Williams. We had walked the beat together 30 years ago before he went private. He was the kind of man who could find a needle in a haystack provided you paid him in bourbon and didn't ask how he got the hay. I banged on the door. A moment later, Elijah opened it, wearing a bathrobe and holding a half-eaten sandwich. He took one look at my face and stepped aside. "Coffee is on, Reggie," he said. "Tell me who we are burying." We sat in his kitchen, surrounded by stacks of files and the hum of his server towers. I laid everything out on the table. The burner phone, the invoice from Shady Oaks, the restraining order with the shaky signature. Elijah didn't say a word for 20 minutes. He just listened, his eyes narrowing, his fingers tapping a rhythm on the table. When I finished telling him about the Dubai lie and the $4,000 a month, he let out a long, low whistle. "She is good, Reggie," he said, pulling a laptop toward him. "She is evil, but she is thorough. She isolated him, drugged him, and used his own hand to lock you out. But every criminal leaves a trail. Let's see where the money is going." He started typing, his fingers flying across the keys. I watched the screen, feeling helpless. I was a man of physical action. I could fix a sorting machine, I could detain a suspect, but this digital world was a weapon I didn't know how to wield. "Reggie," Elijah said, his voice dropping. "When did you put Nash on the deed to your house?" I rubbed my forehead, the memory painful. 5 years ago, after my first heart attack. I was scared, Elijah. I didn't want the state to take the house for probate if I died suddenly. I wanted Nash to have it easy. I added him as a joint tenant with rights of survivorship. Elijah stopped typing. He turned the laptop around so I could see the screen. It wasn't a bank statement, it was a real estate listing, a pending sale listing. There on the screen was my house, the house where I had raised my son, the house where my wife had taken her last breath. It was listed as under contract. The seller wasn't listed as Reginald Carter. It was listed as Nash Carter, represented by power of attorney Tiffany Carter. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. She is selling my house, I choked out. But she can't. I am still alive. I am living there. She can, if she has power of attorney over Nash, and Nash is a joint owner. Elijah explained, his voice grim. And look at the closing date, Reggie. I leaned in. The closing date was tomorrow. She is pushing it through as a distressed asset sale. Elijah continued, scrolling down. Cash buyer, fast closing, no inspection. She is dumping it for 60% of the market value just to get the liquid cash fast. Why, I asked, slamming my fist on the table. Why does she need the cash so fast if she is getting $4,000 a month from me? Elijah clicked another window open. It was a flight manifest he had pulled from a travel database. Because she isn't staying, Reggie. Look at this. Tiffany Carter has a one-way ticket booked for Dubai departing in 48 hours. And she isn't flying alone. She has a ticket for a man named Dr. Julian Thorne. Dr. Thorne, I repeated. The name sounded familiar. Elijah pulled up a personnel file. Dr. Julian Thorne, Chief Medical Officer at Shady Oaks Assisted Living. The room spun. It wasn't just greed, it was a conspiracy. The woman I called daughter and the doctor responsible for my son's care were lovers. They were draining us dry, selling my home, and planning to disappear into the sunset with my life savings, leaving Nash to rot in that facility as a ward of the state. And if that sale goes through tomorrow, Elijah said softly, closing the laptop, you won't just be a father fighting for his son. You will be a homeless old man with no assets, no address, and no credibility. They will put you in a shelter, Reggie, and Nash will die in that room. I stood up. The fear was gone. The shock was gone. All that was left was a cold, hard clarity. They think they have checkmated me, I said, buttoning my jacket. They think I am just an old man who signs checks and watches TV. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the only thing of value I had left on me, my father's gold pocket watch. I placed it on Elijah's table. I need you to find out where that closing is happening, I said. And I need you to find out exactly what dirt we have on Dr. Julian Thorne. Elijah pushed the watch back to me. Keep your watch, Reggie. I am doing this for the badge, and because I hate people who mess with family. The closing is at the title company downtown, 10 a.m. I nodded. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., Tiffany thinks she is signing a paper to get rich. She has no idea she is signing her own confession. But first, I looked at the burner phone sitting on the table. I need to send a message back to Nash. I need him to know I didn't abandon him. How? Elijah asked. You can't get in there. I don't need to get in, I said, walking to the door. I just need to get close enough to be loud. I walked out into the night. The stars were hidden by the city smog, but I didn't need light to see where I was going. I was going back to the darkness. I was going back to Shady Oaks. Not to knock on the door this time, but to wake the dead. The next morning, I stood in the lobby of the First National Bank, the same branch where I had opened my first savings account 50 years ago. Back then, the manager shook your hand and knew the names of your children. Now it was just cold marble and silence. I walked up to the counter, trying to keep my hands from trembling. I needed cash. I needed every cent I had to pay Elijah and to hire a lawyer who wasn't afraid of a fight. I slid my withdrawal slip across the counter to Mrs. Higgins, a woman I had known since she was a teller trainee. I wrote the amount for $20,000. It was a lot, but it was my money. It was the money I had saved for a rainy day, and Lord knows the storm was here. Mrs. Higgins smiled at first, that polite professional smile, but as she typed into her computer, the smile faded. Her brow furrowed. She typed again, harder this time, as if the keys were resisting her. Then she stopped and looked at me, her eyes filled with a pity I didn't understand. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, I am afraid I cannot process this withdrawal. What do you mean? I asked, gripping the edge of the counter. Is the system down? No, sir. The system is fine, but there is a flag on your account. It has been frozen pending a review by the fraud department. Fraud, I almost shouted, causing the security guard by the door to look up. It is my money. I earned it carrying mail for 30 years. Who flagged it? Mrs. Higgins turned the screen slightly so I could see. It was initiated by the joint account holder, she said. Mrs. Tiffany Carter called this morning. She reported suspicious activity. She said she was concerned you were being targeted by scammers and that your mental state was declining. She requested a full freeze to protect your assets. My ears started to ring. It was a high-pitched whine that drowned out the hum of the air conditioner. She had beaten me here. She knew I would come for the money. She had turned the system, the very system I trusted, into a weapon against me. But she is lying, I stammered, feeling small, feeling old. I am not senile. I am perfectly fine. Unfreeze it. I am the primary account holder. I am sorry, Reggie, Mrs. Higgins said, and I could tell she meant it. But once the fraud flag is raised by a joint holder, especially with a claim of elder competency issues, our hands are tied until a court order clears it. It is for your protection, for my protection. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. The woman who had kidnapped my son and was selling my house was now protecting my money from me. I walked out of the bank with nothing but the lint in my pockets. I felt naked. I felt powerless. In America, without money, you are not a citizen. You are a ghost. I drove home in a daze. The world outside my truck window looked distorted, warped by my own panic. How was I going to save Nash if I couldn't even buy a tank of gas? How was I going to fight a legal battle with $0? When I pulled into my driveway, I saw her car. The white SUV was parked right in the middle of the driveway, blocking the path to the garage. She wasn't hiding anymore. I parked on the street and walked up the path. The front door was wide open. I walked into my own living room to find Tiffany sitting in my recliner, my chair, the one my wife had bought me for my 60th birthday. She was drinking coffee from my favorite mug. She looked up as I entered, and for the first time in 4 years, the mask was completely gone. There was no sweetness in her eyes, no daughterly concern. There was only the cold, hard stare of a predator looking at wounded prey. "Did you have a nice trip to the bank, Dad?" she asked, taking a slow sip of coffee. I stood there, my fists clenched at my sides. "You've frozen my account. You put Nash in a cage, and now you are trying to starve me out. I am managing the family assets," she corrected, her voice smooth and devoid of emotion. "Someone has to. You are obviously not capable anymore. I mean, look at you, wandering around farmer markets, imagining conspiracies, forgetting where you put things." "It is sad, really. Get out of my house," I said, my voice low. "Get out before I do something I will regret." She laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. "Your house. Oh, Reggie, you really don't remember, do you? That is exactly what I told the judge. The memory loss is the first sign." She reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of papers. She tossed them onto the coffee table. They slid across the wood and stopped right at my feet. "I filed for emergency guardianship this morning," she said, examining her fingernails. "With the report from the bank, the testimony from Dr. Thorne about your erratic behavior during your visits to his clinic and the incident with the police last night. It was an open and shut case. The hearing is next week, but the temporary order gives me control over your medical and financial decisions effective immediately." I stared at the papers. Guardianship. She wasn't just taking my money, she was taking my life. She was trying to turn me into a child, a dependent, a non-entity. "You are lying," I said. "I have never been to Dr. Thorne's clinic. I have never been his patient." "Haven't you?" she asked, tilting her head. "Think back, Reggie. Think back to all those Sunday afternoons when you felt so tired, when you would get dizzy and confused, when you would wake up hours later and not remember falling asleep. Who was there taking care of you? Who made you that special herbal tea because she was so worried about your health?" The memory hit me like a physical blow. The tea. The hibiscus tea she insisted on brewing for me every time she came over. She said it was for my blood pressure. She said it was an ancient remedy. I drank it because I trusted her. I drank it, and 20 minutes later the world would get soft and blurry. My tongue would feel thick. I would lose time. I remembered the time I woke up in the backyard in my underwear, shivering with no memory of how I got there. Tiffany had been there crying, telling the neighbors that Dad was having another episode. I had believed her. I had thought my mind was betraying me. I had gone to bed terrified that I was losing myself like my father did before he passed. But it wasn't dementia. It was poison. "You drugged me," I whispered, the horror washing over me. "For years. You have been poisoning me to build a case file. I was helping you sleep," she said with a shrug. "And if you looked a little crazy to the neighbors, well, that just helps the narrative, doesn't it? Nobody believes a crazy old man, Reggie. especially when the concerned, loving daughter-in-law is crying by his side. She stood up and smoothed her skirt. You are going to Shady Oaks, Reggie, not as a visitor, as a resident. Dr. Thorne has a bed waiting for you. Room 302. It is right next to Nash. You two can be roommates. Won't that be nice? You can spend the rest of your short lives drooling on each other while I spend the inheritance you so kindly protected for us. I lunged at her. I couldn't help it. The rage was a fire that consumed all logic. I wanted to wipe that smirk off her face. But before I could take 2 steps, the room was filled with red and blue light flashing through the front window. A siren chirped a short, authoritative burst. Tiffany checked her watch. Right on time, she said, stepping back out of reach. I turned to the door. 2 uniformed police officers and a woman in a gray suit were walking up the path. The woman carried a clipboard. She looked tired and efficient, like a person who processed human tragedy like paperwork. Mr. Carter, the woman called out as she stepped through the open door. I am Sarah Jenkins from Adult Protective Services. We received an emergency call regarding your safety. I looked at the police, then at Tiffany. She had already switched faces. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of terrified concern. She rushed toward the social worker, tears already welling up in her eyes. Oh, thank God you are here, she sobbed, grabbing the woman's arm. He was getting violent again. He tried to hit me. He is talking about conspiracies and poison. Please, you have to help him. He doesn't know what he is doing. The police officers stepped forward, their hands resting near their belts. One of them was the same officer who had been at the house the night I was kicked out. He recognized me. Mr. Carter, take a step back and sit down, the officer ordered. I looked at them. I looked at the trap that had snapped shut around me. If I fought, I was violent and dangerous. If I stayed silent, I was catatonic and incompetent. If I spoke the truth, I was paranoid and delusional. Reggie. Listen to me, the social worker said, her voice calm and condescending. We have a court order to transport you to a secure facility for a 72-hour mental health evaluation. It is for your own good. We just want to make sure you are okay. A 72-hour hold. That was 3 days. The closing on my house was tomorrow morning. If they took me now, Tiffany would sell the house, take the money, and flee the country with Dr. Thorne before I ever got out. Nash would be lost forever. I looked at the window. The backyard. The fence was old wood. I could kick through it. But I was 72. Could I outrun 2 cops in their 20s? I looked at Tiffany. She was watching me over the social worker's shoulder. Her eyes were gleaming with triumph. She mouthed 2 words to me. Bye, Dad. I took a deep breath. I thought about Nash strapped to that wheelchair. I thought about the 4 years of lies. I thought about the tea. And I realized that Reginald Carter, the postmaster, the law-abiding citizen, had to die right here in this living room. Because the man who walked out of here needed to be a fugitive. I am not going anywhere with you, I said, my voice steady. Mr. Carter. Don't make this difficult, the officer warned, unclipping his taser. I am not making it difficult, I said slowly, reaching for my chest, feigning a pain that wasn't there. I am making it medical. My heart. I can't breathe. I collapsed onto the floor, clutching my chest. It was the only card I had left to play. If they took me to the ER, I had a chance. If they took me to Shady Oaks, I was dead. Call an ambulance, the social worker screamed. As the chaos erupted around me, I saw Tiffany's face fall. She hadn't planned on a heart attack. She hadn't planned on a detour to a real hospital with real doctors who might find the traces of sedatives in my blood. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me, praying that my old heart could handle one last lie to save the truth. I lay on the floorboards, the taste of dust and humiliation in my mouth. My chest wasn't actually hurting, but my pride was screaming. Above me, the social worker was frantically dialing 911, and Tiffany was performing her role of the distressed daughter-in-law with Oscar-worthy precision. I saw the police officer's hand hovering over his radio. If the paramedics came, they would sedate me. If they sedated me, I would wake up in Shady Oaks. I had to stop this train before it went off the cliff. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air, and sat up. The sudden movement made everyone freeze. Cancel the call. I said, my voice sharp and authoritative, the same tone I used to use when a clerk was sorting the priority mail into the wrong bin. Mr. Carter, please lie down. The social worker stammered. You are having a cardiac event. I am not having a cardiac event, I said, pushing myself up to my feet. I dusted off my trousers and looked the police officer dead in the eye. I am having a reaction to a severe betrayal of trust. And officer, before you let this woman drag me away, you need to ask yourself if you have the legal grounds to do it. The officer looked at me, then at Tiffany. Sir, we have a report of violent behavior and mental instability. The law says. I know what the law says. I cut him off. I may be retired, but I spent 30 years working for the federal government. I know the statutes for involuntary commitment in the state of Georgia. Section 1013 requires evidence that I am an imminent threat to myself or others, not an annoyance, not an old man who raised his voice, but a threat. I pointed a steady finger at the wall. Can you show me the hole I punched? Can you show me the bruise on her arm? Can you show me a weapon? Tiffany stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. He is delusional, officer. He thinks I am poisoning him. He thinks I kidnapped his son. Isn't that enough proof of insanity? Paranoia is not grounds for commitment unless it leads to violence, I countered, keeping my gaze on the cop. And is it paranoia if it is true? I walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up a framed photo of Nash. My hand didn't shake. I turned to the social worker. Ms. Jenkins, you are here to protect the vulnerable, right? Well, I am the vulnerable one here. This woman has filed for guardianship to sell my home tomorrow morning. If you take me out of this house tonight, you are facilitating a real estate transaction, not a medical intervention. Do you want your name on that lawsuit when I prove I am sane? The room went silent. The social worker looked at her clipboard, then at Tiffany. The timeline made her uncomfortable. The rush to sell the house, the sudden emergency call the night before the closing. It smelled, and she knew it. Officer, the social worker said quietly, if Mr. Carter is refusing medical aid and is currently calm, we cannot force him to go unless he harms someone. The threshold hasn't been met. Tiffany's face twisted into a mask of pure venom. You have got to be kidding me. He collapsed. He is crazy. Take him. Ma'am, step back, the officer said, his stance shifting. He was no longer looking at me as a suspect. He was looking at a domestic dispute that was above his pay grade. Mr. Carter, if you are refusing transport, we are leaving. But listen to me closely. We are filing a report. If we get one more call, just one, we won't be asking questions. We will be taking you in. Do you understand? I understand, I said. Get out! Tiffany hissed at me as the officers ushered her toward the door. This isn't over, old man. I will be back at 8 a.m. with a judge's order. Enjoy your last night in this house. The door slammed shut, leaving me in the silence of the home I had built. I didn't celebrate. I didn't sit down. I knew exactly what time it was. It was 8:15 p.m. I had less than 12 hours before she came back with the legal cavalry. I went to the kitchen to pour a glass of water, but I stopped. My eyes landed on the new digital clock Tiffany had bought me last Christmas. It was one of those smart devices with a camera and a voice assistant. She insisted I keep it in the kitchen so I could look up recipes. I looked at the little green light next to the lens. It was steady, watching. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I walked into the living room. The smoke detector looked newer than I remembered. The router blinking in the hallway was a model I hadn't bought. She hadn't just drugged me. She had bugged me. She knew I went to the bank because she was listening. She knew I was home because she was watching. I wasn't living in a sanctuary. I was living on a stage, performing a tragedy for an audience of one. I felt a surge of violations so deep it made me nauseous, but I swallowed it down. If she was watching, I had to give her a show. I shuffled to the bedroom, acting tired and defeated. I spoke out loud to the empty room. I am so tired. Maybe she is right. Maybe I am losing it. I changed into my pajamas, making sure to do it in view of the hallway mirror. I turned off the lights. I climbed into bed and pulled the covers up. I lay there for 20 minutes, breathing rhythmically until the house was completely still. Then I moved. I didn't get up. I slid out of the bed onto the floor, rolling to the side that was blind to the hallway angle. I crawled on my hands and knees, my joints protesting across the carpet to the closet. I didn't take my suitcase. I didn't take my phone. The phone was a tracking device. I left it on the nightstand. I left my wallet next to it. Let them think I was asleep. Let them think I was broken. I pulled out an old duffel bag from the back of the closet. I packed light, a flashlight, my old service revolver which I prayed still fired, a roll of duct tape, and a pair of heavy bolt cutters I used to use for gardening. I didn't use the back door. It had a sensor. I knew that now. I went to the bathroom window. It was small, tight, and high up. I had to stand on the toilet to reach it. I squeezed through, scraping my ribs, gasping in pain as I dropped onto the wet grass of the backyard. I lay in the darkness of my own garden, smelling the damp earth. I felt like a fugitive in the country I had served my whole life. I stayed in the shadows of the azalea bushes, moving toward the neighbor's fence. I couldn't take my truck. It had GPS. Tiffany would be tracking it. I had to walk. Shady Oaks was 8 miles away. For a man of 30, it is a jog. For a man of 72 with a bad heart, it is a marathon. But I didn't feel the fatigue. I felt a fire in my belly that burned hotter than any pain. I stuck to the drainage ditches and the wooded easements behind the strip malls. I walked through the underbelly of Atlanta, avoiding street lights, avoiding cars. Every time a siren wailed in the distance, I froze, pressing myself against the bark of a tree or the cold brick of a warehouse. It took me 3 hours. When I saw the neon sign of Shady Oaks flickering in the distance, my legs were trembling so bad I thought they would buckle. My shirt was soaked with sweat, but I was there. The facility was quiet. The guard in the booth, the one who had mocked me, was asleep, his feet up on the desk, the blue light of the TV washing over his face. I didn't go to the gate. I went to the spot I had scouted earlier, the eroded patch of earth beneath the chain-link fence. I lay on my back and pushed the duffel bag through first. Then I shimmied under the metal. The rusty wire snagged my jacket, tearing the fabric, scratching my shoulder. I bit my lip to keep from crying out. I pulled myself through the mud inch by inch until I was inside. I was in the belly of the beast. I crept through the courtyard. It was eerie, silent, no crickets, just the hum of the industrial air conditioning units. I counted the windows. 3rd from the left. That was where I had seen him. I reached the window. It was dark now. The light inside was off. I pressed my face against the glass. I couldn't see anything. I tapped the glass lightly with my fingernail. Tap, tap, tap. Nothing. I tapped harder. Suddenly a shape moved in the darkness. A face appeared on the other side of the glass. It was low near the bottom of the pane. I clicked on my flashlight, covering the lens with my fingers to let only a sliver of light through. The beam hit the face. I had to clamp my hand over my mouth to stop the scream that tried to escape my throat. It was Nash. But it wasn't the Nash I had seen yesterday. Yesterday I saw a silhouette. Today I saw the details. His face was gaunt, the skin stretched tight over his skull like parchment. His lips were cracked and bleeding. His eyes were sunken into black pits of exhaustion. But the worst part wasn't his face. It was his neck. There was a collar around his neck. A thick, padded medical restraint collar attached to a strap that was secured to the bed frame. He was tethered like a dog. He blinked in the light, his eyes trying to focus. When he saw me, a look of pure, unadulterated agony washed over his face. He didn't smile. He didn't look relieved. He looked terrified. He raised a hand that was nothing but bone and trembling tendons, and pointed frantically toward the door of his room. He mouthed one word, trap. Then I heard it. The sound of heavy boots on the linoleum floor inside the hallway. They were coming. They knew I was here. I looked at the window latch. It was painted shut. I looked at the bolt cutters in my hand. I looked at my son, who was dying by inches in front of me. I didn't care about the noise anymore. I didn't care about the law. I raised the heavy steel tool and smashed it into the glass. The sound of shattering safety glass exploded in the night like a gunshot. "I am coming, son!" I roared, reaching through the jagged shards. "Daddy is here!" The sound of shattering glass was still ringing in my ears as I cleared the jagged shards from the window frame with the sleeve of my jacket. I didn't wait for the dust to settle. I vaulted through the opening landing hard on the linoleum floor. A sharp pain shot up my left leg, a reminder of my arthritis, a reminder that I wasn't 25 anymore. But pain was a luxury I couldn't afford. I was in the room. I was in the cell where my son had been rotting for 4 years. The smell hit me instantly. It wasn't just the sterile sting of bleach. It was the sour copper scent of neglect. It was the smell of a life being slowly erased. Nash stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking in the harsh beam of my flashlight. He tried to speak, but his tongue was thick, swollen from dehydration or drugs or both. He just made a low, guttural sound that tore my heart into pieces. I rushed to the bed. Up close, the damage was worse than I could have imagined. My son, who used to lift weights in the garage, who used to carry me on his shoulders in the pool, was now a skeleton wrapped in gray skin. I touched his arm. It was cold. So cold. "I am here, Nash," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Daddy is here." I brought the bolt cutters down on the leather straps binding his wrists. The steel bit into the aged leather with a crunch. One strap, then the other. Nash's arms fell limply to his sides, leaving angry red welts where the restraints had eaten into his flesh. "We have to go, son," I said, grabbing his shoulders. "Can you stand?" He tried. I felt his muscles bunch, trying to fire, but they were atrophied. He slumped forward, a dead weight against my chest. He was too weak. He couldn't walk. I looked at the door. I could hear shouting in the hallway, heavy boots pounding on the tile. They were coming. I did the only thing a father could do. I turned my back to him, grabbed his arms, and hoisted him up. "Climb on," I grunted. "Hold on to my neck." He was lighter than he should have been, but to a 72-year-old man with a heart condition, he felt like the weight of the world. I staggered as I stood up, my knees trembling violently. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat warning me to stop. But I didn't stop. I gritted my teeth, locking my jaw. I would carry him out of here, or I would die trying. I kicked the door open. The hallway was bathed in a flashing red emergency light. A siren was wailing a high-pitched shriek that disoriented the senses. "Hey, you stop right there." It was the guard from the front gate. He was at the end of the hall, about 50 feet away, pulling a taser from his belt. Behind him, a nurse in blue scrubs was pointing a finger at me, screaming something I couldn't hear over the siren. I didn't freeze. I didn't put my hands up. I shifted Nash's weight on my back and looked for an exit. The main doors were behind the guard. That path was blocked. But I knew buildings like this. I knew government-subsidized construction. I knew fire codes. I spotted a red box on the wall to my right, a fire extinguisher. I lurched toward it, grabbed the heavy canister with my free hand and pulled the pin. "Put the weapon down." The guard shouted, charging toward me. I didn't aim at him. I aimed at the floor between us. I squeezed the handle. A massive cloud of white chemical powder exploded into the hallway, creating an instant wall of fog. It choked the air, blinding the guard, sending the nurse into a coughing fit. I turned and ran the other way toward the service exit I had seen on the evacuation map by the elevator. My lungs were burning. Every step was agony. Nash's breath was hot and ragged against my ear. He was mumbling, delirious. "Almost there, son. Almost there." I shoulder-checked the service door. Locked. Damn it. I dropped Nash gently to the floor, leaning him against the wall. I raised the fire extinguisher and smashed the handle against the crash bar. Once. Twice. The metal groaned and gave way. The door swung open into the humid night air. I scooped Nash up again. My vision was starting to blur at the edges. Black spots danced in front of my eyes. My chest felt like it was being crushed by a vice. We stumbled into the loading dock area behind the building. The gravel crunched loudly under my feet. "There he is. Get the truck." 2 more guards were sprinting around the corner of the building. They had flashlights. Beams of light sliced through the darkness, searching for us. I ducked behind a row of industrial dumpsters. I was cornered. The fence was too high to climb with Nash. The gate was locked. My truck was miles away. I looked down at Nash. He had passed out again. "I am sorry, son," I whispered, tears mixing with the sweat on my face. I tried. Suddenly a roar cut through the sound of the sirens. Not a police siren. A diesel engine. A heavy, rattling, beautiful sound. Twin headlights blinded me as a large delivery van smashed through the wooden service gate at the back of the lot, sending splinters flying everywhere. The van skidded to a halt right in front of the dumpsters, blocking the guard's line of sight. The back door rolled up with a metallic clang. Dante was there, his face wild with adrenaline. "Get in. Throw him in. Now." I didn't ask questions. I summoned the last reserve of strength. I had a reserve that came from a place beyond biology, a place where only love exists. I lifted Nash and shoved him onto the metal floor of the truck. Dante grabbed his shirt and pulled him the rest of the way. I scrambled up after him. "Go! Go!" The truck lurched forward before I even had the door closed. Tires spun in the gravel, finding traction, and then we were moving. I heard a thud against the side of the truck, a baton or maybe a rock thrown by a guard, but we were already gaining speed. We swerved onto the main road, the sudden motion sending me tumbling against a stack of packages. I crawled over to Nash. I checked his pulse. It was weak, thready, but it was there. He was alive. Dante shouted from the driver's seat, his voice cracking. I saw the lights. "Mr. Carter." I was waiting down the block. I saw the lights go red, and I knew. I just knew. "You saved us, Dante." I wheezed, clutching my chest, trying to slow my heart rate down before it killed me. You saved us. I looked at my son. In the dim light of the cargo hold, amidst cardboard boxes and courier bags, he looked like a broken doll. I brushed the matted hair away from his forehead. We are safe, Nash, I said softly. We are going to a safe house. We are going to fix this. Nash's eyes fluttered open. He looked at me. Really looked at me for the first time in years. His eyes weren't glazed anymore. They were terrified, lucid, and terrified. He reached up and grabbed my lapel with a strength that surprised me. His fingers dug into the fabric. Dad, he rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves scraping together. Hush now, rest, I said. We will get your house back. We will get the money back. No, he choked out, shaking his head violently. No house, don't go to the house. Why, son, it is okay. Tiffany is... She didn't just sell it, Nash gasped, his eyes bulging. She took out a policy. High risk. Fire and casualty. Last week. A cold dread washed over me, colder than the night air. What are you saying, Nash? The gas line, he whispered, tears streaming down his gaunt face. She tampered with his gas line in the basement. And the pilot light, she put it on a timer. It is rigged, Dad. It is a bomb. I froze. If we go back there, if anyone goes back there... She wants the insurance money, Nash wheezed, coughing up bile. She wants us both dead in the rubble. Accident. Tragic accident. I looked at the digital watch on my wrist. It was midnight. Tiffany had said she would be back at 8 a.m., but if what Nash said was true, she wasn't planning on coming back with a judge. She was planning on waking up to the news of a gas explosion that killed her demented father-in-law. But I wasn't in the house. The house was empty. Wait. My blood turned to ice. The house wasn't empty. I had left my phone there. I had left my wallet. But more importantly, I remembered the neighbor's kid, little Toby. He came over every Wednesday morning before school to water my hydrangeas because I paid him $5. But sometimes he snuck into the basement to play with his toy soldiers because he knew I left the side door unlocked for him. Tomorrow wasn't Wednesday, but tonight was the night Toby sometimes hid in my basement when his parents were fighting. I had found him there twice before. Dante, I screamed, pounding on the partition. Turn around. Mr. Carter, we can't. The cops. Turn this truck around, I roared. There is a bomb in my house, and there might be a kid inside. The truck swerved violently as Dante slammed on the brakes. We weren't running away anymore. We were driving straight back into the fire, and I prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in years that we weren't too late. The truck rattled over the potholes of the old Fourth Ward, a neighborhood the city developers hadn't touched yet, a place where the streetlights were mostly broken and the shadows were long and deep. This was where I grew up. This was where I learned to fight to survive and to keep my mouth shut. Tiffany would never drive her white SUV down these streets. To her, this wasn't Atlanta. This was a war zone. To me, it was the only sanctuary left. Dante pulled the van into the alley behind a boarded-up barber shop. It belonged to his uncle, a man who owed me a favor from 20 years ago when I kept his son out of the juvenile system. We carried Nash down the narrow concrete stairs into the basement. It smelled of damp earth, old hair tonic, and secrets. It wasn't sterile like Shady Oaks. It was dirty. It was dark, but it was ours. We laid Nash on an old leather sofa that had seen better decades. Dante ran out to get water and supplies from the corner store, leaving me alone in the dim light with my son. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The adrenaline of the escape was fading, replaced by a cold, hard terror. He wasn't just thin, he was broken. And as the drugs from the facility began to wear off, the real nightmare began. It started with a tremor in his hands. Then his teeth began to chatter, a sound like dice rattling in a cup. His eyes rolled back in his head, showing the whites, and he let out a low, keen moan that sounded more animal than human. Nash, I whispered, kneeling beside him, grabbing a rag to wipe the cold sweat that was already soaking through his shirt. I am here. Daddy is here. You are safe. He didn't hear me. He was trapped in the chemical storm raging inside his blood. His body arched off the sofa, his spine bowing, his muscles locking up in a violent spasm. I wanted to scream for a doctor. My hand instinctively went to my pocket for a phone I didn't have. But even if I had one who could, I call. If I called an ambulance, they would run his ID. They would see the guardianship order. They would see the police report Tiffany had filed. They would take him back to her, and this time she would make sure he never woke up. I had to be the doctor. I had to be the nurse. I had to be the father who watched his son burn in hell so he could walk out the other side. I found a bucket and filled it with water from the utility sink in the corner. I tore strips from my own shirt to make compresses. I held him down as he thrashed his bony elbows striking my chest, his knees kicking my arthritic shoulders. I took the blows. I took every single one, telling myself it was penance for the 4 years I had spent blind and comfortable while he was living this reality. Sometime around 3 in the morning, the screaming started. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of memory. No. Nash yelled, his voice cracking, eyes wide open, but seeing nothing in the basement. I won't sign it. It is my dad's house. I won't sign it. I froze, the wet rag hovering over his forehead. Then his voice changed, dropping to a whimper. Please, not the needle. I will do the video. I will smile. Just don't use the needle. I listened, tears streaming down my face as my son narrated his own torture. Piece by piece, the puzzle of the last 4 years fell into place, and it was uglier than anything I could have imagined. He talked about the studio. Not a studio in Dubai. A room in the basement of her lover's house. He talked about how they would starve him for 2 days until he agreed to put on the suit and read the script they had written. Smile, Nash, he muttered, mimicking Tiffany's voice with chilling accuracy. Smile and tell Daddy you love him. Tell him business is booming. If you mess up the line, Dr. Thorne will give you the special vitamin shot again. Dr. Thorne, the man I had trusted, the man who was currently planning to fly to Dubai with my money. Nash thrashed again, gripping my wrist with a strength born of desperation. She is laughing. Dad, he gasped, looking right through me. She is in the corner with him. They are counting the money. She says the old man is too stupid to notice. She says, I am a cash cow. Milk him until he is dry, then send him to the butcher. I held him tighter, rocking him back and forth like I did when he was a boy and had a fever. I am not stupid anymore, Nash. I promised him, my voice thick with rage. The cow is out of the barn, and the bull is coming for them. By dawn, the worst of the seizures had passed. He fell into a fitful sleep, his breathing shallow but steady. I sat on the floor, my back against the damp concrete wall, keeping vigil. I felt older than the building I was sitting in. I felt hollowed out. Dante came back down the stairs quietly, carrying a bag of sandwiches and a portable television set he had dug out from somewhere. He looked at Nash, then at me. He didn't say anything. He just plugged the TV into the single working outlet and adjusted the rabbit ear antennas. You need to see this, Mr. Carter, Dante said softly. The screen flickered to life, showing the morning news. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, Breaking News, Amber Alert for Missing Vulnerable Adult. And there she was. Tiffany was standing in front of my house, the house I had built, the house that was currently rigged with a gas bomb. She was surrounded by microphones and cameras. She wasn't wearing her designer clothes today. She was wearing a modest cardigan, her hair tied back in a messy bun, looking every inch the distraught housewife. She was crying, big heavy tears that rolled down her cheeks. Please, she sobbed into the microphones, clutching a tissue. If anyone sees my father-in-law, Reginald Carter, please call the police immediately. He is suffering from severe dementia. He has become violent and paranoid. Last night he broke into the care facility where my husband, his own son, was receiving treatment for early onset Alzheimer's. I stared at the screen, my jaw clenching so hard my teeth ached. She had flipped the script. Nash wasn't the victim. I was the villain. He kidnapped my husband, Tiffany continued, her voice trembling perfectly. Nash needs constant medical attention. Without his medication, he could die within 24 hours. My father-in-law doesn't know what he is doing. He thinks he is saving him, but he is killing him. Please, bring them home. The camera cut to the police chief, a man I had known for years, a man I had played poker with. He looked grave. We consider Mr. Carter to be armed and dangerous, the chief said. We have reports that he assaulted staff at the Shady Oaks facility and caused significant property damage. We are urging the public not to approach him. If you see a blue Ford pickup truck license plate ending in 45, call 911 immediately. Dante looked at me, his eyes wide. They are hunting you, Mr. Carter. The whole city is hunting you. I looked at the TV at the woman who had destroyed my family, playing the victim for millions of viewers. She was winning. She had the law, she had the media, and she had the public sympathy. But she had made one mistake. She said Nash had Alzheimer's. She said he needed medication to survive. I looked over at the sofa. Nash was stirring. He opened his eyes, and for the first time in 4 years they were clear. Weak, yes. Pain-filled, yes. But clear. He looked at the TV, saw his wife weeping fake tears, and a look of cold recognition passed over his face. "Dad." He croaked, his voice raspy but steady. I crawled over to him. "I am here, son." "That isn't true," he said, pointing a shaking finger at the screen. "I don't have Alzheimer's. And I don't need her medicine." "I know," I said. "I know, I need my laptop," Nash whispered. "The one I hid. Before they took me." "Where is it, Nash?" "It is in the safety deposit box," he said, closing his eyes as a wave of exhaustion hit him. Bank of America. The key is sewn into the lining of my old fishing hat, the one in the garage. My heart sank. The garage was attached to the house that was rigged to blow, the house that was swarming with police and news crews. "We can't go back there, Nash," I said gently. "It is a fortress." Nash grabbed my hand again. "You have to. The evidence, the videos she made me do, the original takes where she is coaching me, they are on the cloud. But the two-factor authentication, it is on that laptop. It is the only way to prove she is lying. Without it, it is just your word against hers, and she is winning." I looked back at the TV. Tiffany was being hugged by the mayor. The world was cheering for her. I looked at Dante. He looked terrified, but he nodded slowly. "I know a back way into your neighborhood, Mr. Carter," Dante said. "Through the storm drains. We used to use them to sneak into the country club pool." I stood up. My knees popped, but my legs held firm. "Dante, you stay here with Nash. Give him water. Keep him quiet." "Where are you going?" Dante asked. I picked up my old baseball cap and pulled it low over my eyes. I picked up the bolt cutters. "I am going fishing," I said. I turned to leave the basement, stepping out of the sanctuary and back into the war. Tiffany wanted a story for the news. She wanted a tragic ending. Well, I was going to give her a story, but the ending wasn't going to be the one she wrote. The old mailman was about to make one last special delivery. While the world watched Tiffany Carter play the grieving wife on the 6 o'clock news, wiping away fake tears and pleading for her husband's safe return, I was busy doing the one thing she never thought a man of my station would do. I was planning a war. I wasn't going to call the television station and scream my innocence. I wasn't going to turn myself into a police force that had already printed my face on a wanted poster. I knew something Tiffany didn't. I knew that silence is the loudest noise you can make when your enemy is waiting for you to scream. In the Postal Service, we had a saying about lost packages. If you want to find out where something really came from, you don't look at the clean label on the front. You look at the tracking history. You look at the path it took in the dark. And usually the truth isn't found in what people keep. It is found in what they throw away. Dante was my legs. I was the brain stuck in a damp basement in the old 4th Ward, but my mind was back on my street calculating the pickup schedule. Trash collection in my neighborhood was Thursday morning. That meant Wednesday night tonight was the night everyone rolled their bins to the curb. Tiffany was planning to leave the country in 48 hours. She wouldn't be packing keepsakes. She would be shedding skin. She would be purging everything that tied her to the crime she had committed against my family. I gave Dante the instructions. He looked at me like I was crazy, but he took the keys to his battered van. I told him not to get close to the house. I told him to wait until she put the bins out and went back inside to rehearse her next interview. Then I needed him to be a garbage man. I needed every bag, every receipt, every scrap of paper she deemed worthless. Dante returned 2 hours later. He smelled like old coffee grounds and diesel, but to me he smelled like hope. He dragged 3 heavy black contractor bags down the stairs and dumped them onto the concrete floor. It was disgusting work. We sat there, a 72-year-old fugitive, and a young delivery driver sifting through the filth of the woman who was currently sleeping in my bed. There were wine bottles, expensive ones, cases of them. While she was telling me Nash's business was failing, she was drinking vintage Cabernet that cost more than my monthly medication. There were shopping receipts from boutiques in Buckhead, designer shoes, handbags, all bought with the cards she told me were frozen. But then we found the real poison. At the bottom of the second bag, buried inside a carton of takeout sushi, was a small, unassuming pharmacy bag. It wasn't from Walgreens or CVS. It was from a private dispensary attached to the Shady Oaks facility. I pulled out the empty vials. The labels were mostly torn off, but I could still read the chemical names. Haloperidol, risperidone, heavy antipsychotics. I looked at Nash, who was sleeping fitfully on the couch. These weren't medicines for early-onset Alzheimer's. These were chemical straitjackets. These were drugs used to subdue violent patients in maximum security wards. She hadn't been treating him. She had been chemically lobotomizing him. My hand shook as I held a vial up to the light. There was still a drop of liquid inside. This was it. This was the proof that she had been poisoning him. But I needed more. I needed to link her to Dr. Thorne. I needed to prove this wasn't just medical malpractice, but a conspiracy. Dante found it in the third bag. It was shredded paper. She had been careful, but not careful enough. She had used a cheap strip shredder, not a cross-cut one. She was arrogant. She thought no one would ever look. It took us 3 hours to piece the strips together using clear tape on the back of an old pizza box. It was a printout of an email chain. The subject line was Dubai transfer. The email was from Dr. Julian Thorne. It read, "The escrow account is ready. Once the old man's house closes tomorrow, transfer the funds immediately. I have the passports. Do not worry about Nash." The dosage I gave him last week should have caused permanent cognitive decline by now. He won't be able to testify even if they find him. As for Reggie, the guardianship hearing is a formality. Once he's in my ward, he won't last a month. I will make sure his heart gives out naturally. I read the words, "finish the old man" and "permanent cognitive decline" over and over again. My blood ran cold, then hot. This wasn't just fraud. This was attempted murder, premeditated, cold-blooded murder. Nash woke up while we were taping the last of the letter. He saw the paper. He saw the name Julian Thorne. He didn't cry. He just stared at it, his jaw tightening. She wrote back, Dante whispered, pointing to the bottom of the page. Tiffany's reply was short. "I am handling the gas line tonight. Just in case the sale falls through, the insurance payout is double the market value. Let's burn it all down, Julian. I am ready to be free." The gas line. Nash was right. She really was going to blow up the house. She didn't care if I was inside or if the neighbor's kid was in the basement. She was willing to level a city block for a payout. I looked at the clock. It was 4:00 a.m. The police were hunting me. If I went to them now with taped-up trash, they might listen or they might arrest me before I could speak. Tiffany had charmed the chief. She had the narrative. I needed to break her composure. I needed her to make a mistake so big that even the blindest cop would have to see it. I needed to make her panic. I opened Nash's old laptop, the one we had retrieved from the bank's safety deposit box an hour ago, using the key from his fishing hat. We connected to a public Wi-Fi signal from the coffee shop upstairs, bouncing the signal through 3 different servers so she couldn't trace us. I found her email address, the private one, the one she used to write to her lover. I didn't write a long manifesto. I didn't threaten her. I just wanted her to know that the ghost she thought she was burying was standing right behind her. Subject: the basement. Message: I know about the gas line, Tiffany, and I have the vials from the sushi carton. The police are slow, but I am not. I suggest you check the basement again. The bomb isn't the only thing ticking. I hit send. Then we waited. We didn't have to wait long. Panic is a powerful accelerant. It burns faster than gas. 10 minutes later, Dante's phone buzzed. He had hacked into the smart home system of my house, the same system Tiffany had installed to spy on me. He pulled up the camera feed from the living room. The house was dark, but the infrared camera showed her clearly. She was pacing the living room in her silk robe. She was holding her phone, her knuckles white. She looked terrified. She wasn't the grieving widow anymore. She was a rat trapped in a corner. She dialed a number. The audio from the camera was crisp. "Julian, pick up," she hissed into the phone. A pause. Then she screamed. "He knows. The old man knows. He sent me an email. No, I don't know how. He must have found the trash. I told you we should have burned it." She listened for a moment, shaking her head violently. "No, we can't wait for the closing. If he goes to the cops with the pills, we are done. We have to leave now. Forget the house. Forget the insurance. Just liquidate the accounts. Sell the cars. Get the cash from the safe at the clinic. I am packing the jewelry." She ran a hand through her hair, looking wild. "Meet me at the private hangar in 2 hours. And Julian, bring the gun." If he tries to stop us at the airport, I am not going to jail. I will kill him myself." She hung up and started tearing through the house, sweeping vases off the shelves, ripping paintings off the walls to get to the wall safe. I looked at Nash. He was sitting up, a grim satisfaction on his face. "She is running," Nash said. "She is running right into the trap," I replied, standing up and grabbing my coat. "She was going to the private hangar. She was bringing a gun. And she was meeting the doctor." I looked at Dante. "Do you know where Dr. Thorne's clinic is?" I asked. Dante nodded. "Good," I said. "We aren't going to the airport. We are going to the clinic. If she wants money, she has to go there first. And we are going to be the welcoming committee." I checked my revolver. 6 rounds. I prayed I wouldn't have to use them. But for the woman who tried to turn my son into a vegetable and burn my house to the ground, I wasn't feeling particularly merciful. "Let's go," I said. "It is time to collect the mail." The email I sent had done exactly what a warning shot is supposed to do. It made the birds scatter, but it made the predator desperate. Tiffany didn't go to the clinic. She was too smart for that. She knew that if I had found the vials, the clinic was a crime scene waiting to happen. Instead, she did what people with guilty consciences and expensive habits always do. She tried to cash out. I sat in the basement of the safe house watching the screen of Nash's laptop. My hands were clenched so tight my knuckles were white. There on the real estate website, Zillow was my home. The house where I had carried my wife over the threshold. The house where I had taught Nash to ride a bike. The house where every scratch on the floorboards told a story of a life well lived. It was listed for $300,000. $300,000. It was worth $800 in this market. She had slashed the price by more than half. And in the description in bold, ugly letters, it said cash only, immediate closing, no inspection. She was selling my life for scrap parts. She didn't care about the value. She just needed a suitcase full of money to get on that plane to Dubai. She was holding a fire sale, and I was the one burning. Dante paced the room, looking at the listing over my shoulder. "Mr. Carter, she is practically giving it away. Someone is going to snap that up in an hour. If she sells it to a third party, it is gone. We can't stop a bona fide purchaser." I know I said, my voice low and steady. "That is why we are going to be the purchaser." I reached for the burner phone. I didn't call the police. I called Elias. He was the only lawyer in Atlanta who owed me a favor big enough for this and the only man crazy enough to enjoy it. "Elias," I said when he picked up, "I need you to put on your best suit. You are representing a very wealthy, very private investor from New York. He wants the Carter property, and he wants to pay double." "Double?" Elias asked, his voice crackling with static. "Reggie, you don't have $10, let alone $600,000. "She doesn't know that," I replied. "She sees greed, not numbers. Offer her $600,000. Cash. But there is a catch. My investor is eccentric. He doesn't do electronic signatures. He wants to sign the papers in person tonight at a public event. He likes the fanfare." "And what event is that?" Elias asked. I looked at the other tab open on the laptop. It was Tiffany's social media page. She had posted an invitation just an hour ago, trying to maintain her cover as the philanthropic socialite even as she planned her escape. "The Peachtree Gala," I read. "Tonight at the Grand Hyatt. She is hosting a fundraiser for—" I paused, the irony tasting like bile in my throat. "For mental health awareness." There was a silence on the line, and then Elias chuckled. A dark, dry sound. "You are a wicked man, Reginald Carter. I will make the call." We listened in as Elias made the call to the real estate agent listed a woman who was clearly in on Tiffany's scam. We heard the hesitation, then the excitement, and finally the greed. When Elias mentioned $600,000 in a cashier's check, the trap snapped shut. She agreed. Tiffany agreed. She probably thought she had hit the jackpot, one last big score before she vanished. She was so arrogant, so convinced of her own intelligence that she didn't stop to ask why a stranger would overpay for a house sight unseen. She just saw the zeros. For the next few hours we prepared. It wasn't just about the paperwork. It was about the timing. We had to hit her when she was most vulnerable, when she felt safest. The Grand Hyatt was public. It was full of the city's elite. If we cornered her there, she couldn't scream for help without destroying the mask she had worn for 4 years. But we had a problem. We had the evidence, we had the element of surprise, but we lacked the one thing that would make the jury gasp. We lacked the witness. I turned to look at the couch. Nash was awake. He had been drifting in and out of consciousness all morning, his body fighting the withdrawal from the heavy antipsychotics. Dante had been forcing water and electrolytes down his throat every 20 minutes. Nash was sitting up. He was leaning against the armrest, his face still pale, his eyes sunken, but there was something different about him. The fog was lifting. The glazed, vacant look of the medicated zombie was gone, replaced by the sharp, painful clarity of a man waking up in a nightmare. "Dad," he rasped. I rushed over to him, kneeling on the concrete floor. "I am here, son. Don't try to move too much." Nash shook his head. He reached out and grabbed my forearm. His grip was weak, but it was real. I remember, he whispered. "I remember everything." "What do you remember, Nash?" "I remember the notary," he said, his voice gaining a little more strength with every word. "The one who notarized the power of attorney. She wasn't a notary. She was Tiffany's cousin, the one from Macon. They laughed about it. They laughed about how easy it was to forge your signature on the witness line. This was it, the final nail. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy. And the accounts," Nash continued, squeezing my arm. "The offshore accounts. I heard them talking. Julian and Tiffany. They aren't in Dubai, they are in the Cayman Islands, but the access codes..." Tiffany wrote them down. She doesn't trust digital storage. She wrote them in a ledger. "Where is the ledger, Nash?" He took a deep, shuddering breath. "It is in the house, but not in the safe. She is too smart for that. She hid it in the one place she knew no one would ever look because she thinks we are sentimental fools." "Where, son?" "Inside Mom's old piano," he said, tears welling up in his eyes. "Under the felt lining of the high C key, the one that sticks," she said. "She said dead people make the best guardians." I felt a surge of rage so powerful it almost blinded me. My late wife's piano, the piano she used to play gospel hymns on every Sunday. Tiffany had turned a sacred memory into a hiding place for her stolen fortune. She had desecrated everything I held dear, but she had made a fatal error. She assumed I was just a grieving widower who would never touch those keys again. She didn't know that I dusted that piano every week. She didn't know that I knew exactly which key stuck. "We have to get it," I said, looking at Dante. "No," Nash said, pushing himself up. He swung his legs off the couch. His feet hit the floor. He wobbled, threatening to collapse, but he locked his knees. I watched in awe as my son, the man who had been strapped to a wheelchair just hours ago, fought gravity and chemistry to stand. He grabbed the back of a chair for support, his knuckles white sweat beading on his forehead. "Nash, you are not strong enough," I said, reaching out to steady him. "I am going," he said through gritted teeth. "You can't. It is too dangerous." "Dad, look at me." I looked at him. I saw the fire in his eyes. It was the same fire I saw when he was 10 years old and stood up to a bully twice his size. "She took 4 years of my life," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "She took my dignity. She took my name. She made me a prisoner in my own mind. I am not going to let you fight this battle for me. I am not a package to be delivered, Dad. I am a man, and I am going to be the one to look her in the eye when the handcuffs go on." I looked at Dante. The young man was smiling a fierce, proud smile. "I think he is ready, Mr. Carter," Dante said. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat the size of a fist. I went to the corner and picked up the suit Dante had brought from the thrift store. It was a little big, and it smelled of mothballs, but it was a suit. "Put this on," I said to my son. "If we are going to a gala, we are going to dress the part." Nash took the jacket. His hands were shaking, but he buttoned it himself. He stood there gaunt, scarred, but standing tall. "Tonight Tiffany thinks she is signing a deal with a millionaire," I said, checking my watch. It was 6 p.m. The gala started in an hour. "But she is going to meet the only 2 men in the world who know exactly what she is worth. And the price is going to be higher than she can pay." We walked to the van. Nash leaned heavily on me, but he walked, step by step, out of the darkness of the basement and into the city lights. The Grand Hyatt was waiting, the champagne was chilling, the cameras were ready, and the guests of honor were about to arrive uninvited. As I drove, I thought about the text message on the burner phone. "Just open it alone." That is what Dante had said. Well, I wasn't alone anymore. I had my son back. And together we were going to open up a world of hurt. The arrogance of the wicked is their downfall. Tiffany thought she was the chess master. She thought she had removed all the pieces from the board. But she forgot that a pawn can become a queen if it makes it across the board. And tonight the Kings were coming home. The Grand Hyatt smelled like lilies and old money. It was a scent I knew from delivering packages to the penthouse suites back in the 90s, a smell that was designed to make you forget that the rest of the world was burning. Tonight, however, the burning was closer than the guests in their tuxedos and silk gowns realized. I adjusted the collar of my thrift store suit. It was a little tight across the shoulders, but it was clean. Beside me, Nash was leaning heavily against a marble pillar near the entrance of the ballroom. He was sweating beads of perspiration standing out on his pale forehead, but his eyes were dry and hard. He looked like a soldier who had walked off a battlefield and straight into a cocktail party. "Are you ready, son?" I whispered, gripping his elbow to steady him. He nodded, his jaw set. "I want to see her face, Dad. I want to see her face when the house of cards falls." We blended into the shadows at the back of the room. The ballroom was packed. There were crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hanging from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over the cream of Atlanta society. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne, invisible and efficient. I saw faces I recognized from the news. Politicians, business tycoons, people who thought they were immune to the ugly realities of life. And there on the stage, bathed in a spotlight that made her sequins sparkle like diamonds, was Tiffany. She was wearing a blood-red dress that clung to her curves, a stark contrast to the modest cardigan she had worn on the news this morning. She looked triumphant. She looked untouchable. She was holding a microphone, her voice trembling with a practiced emotion that sickened me. "Thank you all for coming," she said, wiping a delicate tear from her cheek. As many of you know, this foundation, the Carter Initiative for Mental Health, is very close to my heart. My husband Nash was a brilliant engineer, a builder, but the mind is a fragile thing. When the darkness took him, it took a piece of me too. The crowd murmured sympathetically. I felt Nash stiffen beside me. I could feel the rage radiating off him like heat. And now she continued, her voice breaking. "My father-in-law, the man I looked after, like my own father, has also fallen victim to dementia. He is out there somewhere, confused and scared. That is why tonight is so important. Every dollar you donate goes to facilities like Shady Oaks Places that provide sanctuary for the broken. Sanctuary." She called that prison a sanctuary. From my vantage point, I saw Elias moving through the crowd near the front of the stage. He looked every inch the eccentric New York investor we had invented. He was wearing a velvet blazer and round spectacles, carrying a leather portfolio. He caught my eye for a fraction of a second and gave a barely perceptible nod. The trap was set. Tiffany finished her speech to thunderous applause. She descended the stairs immediately, surrounded by well-wishers. But I saw her eyes darting around. She wasn't looking for friends. She was looking for the exit. She checked her watch. She had a plane to catch in 2 hours. Elias stepped into her path. I couldn't hear what he said, but I saw the recognition in her eyes. The greed. He gestured to a small private table near the side of the stage, away from the main crowd. He held up the portfolio. Tiffany hesitated. She looked at the door, then she looked at the portfolio. She knew what was inside. $600,000 in a cashier's check. Clean money. Fast money. She nodded and followed him. We moved closer, slipping through the crowd, using the waiters as cover. I needed to be close enough to see the ink dry. I watched them sit down. Elias laid the papers out on the table. It was the deed to my house, the transfer of ownership. He placed a heavy gold fountain pen on top of the document. I saw Tiffany's hand shaking, not from fear but from anticipation. She picked up the pen. She didn't read the contract. She didn't ask questions. She just wanted to sign and run. "Sign it," I whispered under my breath. "Sign your confession." She pressed the nib to the paper. She signed her name with a flourish. Tiffany Carter, power of attorney. As soon as she lifted the pen, Elias smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. He reached into his pocket, but he didn't pull out the check. He pulled out his phone and sent a text message. That was the signal for Dante, who was sitting in a van in the parking lot, tapped into the hotel's AV system. Suddenly, the soft jazz music that had been playing over the speakers cut out with a screech of feedback. The lights in the ballroom flickered. The crowd gasped, looking around in confusion. On the massive projection screen behind the stage, the logo of the charity dissolved into static. "What is happening?" someone shouted. Tiffany looked up, the pen still in her hand. The static cleared. A video appeared. It wasn't a slick promotional video for the charity. It was grainy black and white footage from a night vision camera. I recognized the room instantly. It was my living room. The timestamp in the corner was from 3 days ago. The audio boomed through the ballroom speakers crisp and clear. It was Tiffany's voice. She was sitting on my sofa, holding a glass of wine, laughing. Sitting next to her, his hand resting intimately on her knee, was a man in a white coat. Dr. Julian Thorne. The crowd went silent. Dead silent. On the screen, Tiffany took a sip of wine and threw her head back. "I am telling you, Julian, it is too easy," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "The old man trusts me blindly. He thinks I am the dutiful daughter. He drinks that tea every Sunday like a good little puppy." Dr. Thorne laughed a cold, clinical sound. "And the son. How is our patient doing in room 302? Tiffany smirked. "He is a vegetable, Julian. That last dose of haloperidol fried him. He will never testify. He doesn't even know his own name anymore." I felt a ripple of shock go through the room. People put their hands over their mouths. On the screen, Tiffany leaned in closer to the doctor. "We sell the house on Thursday," she said. "I already have the power of attorney. We dump the old man in the state ward, claim he is violent, and by the time anyone asks questions, we will be on a beach in the Caymans with $1 million of the Carter family legacy. It is the perfect crime baby." The old mailman delivered the retirement fund right to our door. The video froze on her smiling face. In the ballroom, you could hear a pin drop. Then a glass shattered somewhere in the back. Tiffany stood up, knocking her chair over. Her face had drained of all color. She looked at the screen, then at the crowd. She opened her mouth to speak, to spin a lie, to say it was a deep fake, but no sound came out. That is when I stepped into the light. I walked out from the shadows, my suit jacket buttoned, my head held high. I didn't look like a dementia patient. I looked like a man who had come to collect a debt. And I wasn't alone. Nash let go of my arm. He took a step forward, then another. He walked slowly, painfully toward the table where his wife stood. The crowd parted for us like the Red Sea. They stared at Nash, the man who was supposed to be in Dubai, the man who was supposed to be a vegetable. Tiffany turned and saw us. Her eyes went wide, bulging out of her head. She dropped the gold pen. It clattered onto the marble floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Nash," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Nash stopped 5 feet away from her. He stood tall despite his trembling legs. He looked at the woman he had married, the woman he had loved, the woman who had sold him for parts. "Hello, Tiffany," Nash said. His voice was raspy, damaged from the screaming and the silence, but it carried to every corner of the room. "You said I wouldn't remember my name," he said, pointing a finger at her. "But I do. My name is Nash Carter, and that man standing next to me is Reginald Carter. And neither of us is for sale." Tiffany backed away, shaking her head. No, this isn't real. You are sick. You are crazy." I stepped forward, picking up the contract she had just signed. "Actually," I said, holding the paper up for the room to see, "you just signed a legally binding document transferring the house to a buyer who knows exactly what you are. But don't worry about the money, Tiffany. You won't need it where you are going." "Where am I going?" she shrieked, looking around wildly for an escape route. I pointed to the main doors. As if on cue, the double doors burst open. The police chief walked in, followed by 4 officers. But this time, they weren't looking for a blue Ford truck. They were looking for the lady in red. The chief looked at the screen where the frozen image of Tiffany and Dr. Thorne still loomed over the room. He looked at me and gave a small apologetic nod. "Tiffany Carter." The chief boomed. "You are under arrest for fraud, elder abuse, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder." Tiffany screamed. It was a primal, ugly sound. She turned and ran toward the service exit, hiking up her red dress, shoving guests out of her way. "Julian, help me." But Dr. Thorne wasn't there. He had slipped out the side door the moment the video started abandoning her, just like she had planned to abandon us. 2 officers tackled her before she made it halfway to the kitchen. She kicked and clawed, her mask of sophistication completely gone, revealing the feral creature underneath. I watched as they cuffed her hands behind her back. I watched as they dragged her past the stunned guests. As they passed us, she looked up. Her hair was messy, her mascara running down her face. She locked eyes with me. "You are just a mailman," she spat. "You are nothing." I looked at her, calm and steady. "I am a father," I said. And today I delivered. The room erupted. Not with applause, but with the roar of 100 conversations starting at once. I put my arm around Nash. He was sagging now, the adrenaline fading. "Let's go home, son," I said. Nash looked at me. "We don't have a home, Dad. Remember the gas?" I smiled, pulling the burner phone from my pocket. "While you were getting dressed, I sent Dante to the house with the bomb squad," I said. "They cut the line 10 minutes ago. The house is safe." Nash buried his face in my shoulder and wept. They were the first real tears he had shed in 4 years. And for the first time in a long time, they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of freedom. The video on the giant projection screen flickered and died, plunging the ballroom into a sudden, suffocating twilight. The image of Tiffany laughing about poisoning my son was burned into the retinas of 300 of Atlanta's wealthiest citizens. But the silence that followed was even louder than her recorded confession. It was a vacuum, a void where the air used to be. Every eye was fixed on the woman in the red dress standing on the stage. She looked small now. The spotlight that had glorified her moments ago now seemed to interrogate her, exposing the sweat glistening on her collarbone and the frantic darting panic in her eyes. She gripped the podium, her knuckles white, trying to steady herself as the world she had built on lies began to crumble beneath her designer heels. She let out a laugh, a high-pitched, brittle sound that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "Ladies and gentlemen," she stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the blank screen. "Please, you have to understand, technology these days is terrifying. That was a deep fake. It is AI. My father-in-law, in his sickness, he has hired someone to create these malicious fabrications. He is unwell. He is trying to sabotage the good work we are doing here." She looked around the room, desperate for a nod, a smile, any sign that her charm still held power, but the faces staring back at her were cold. Stone cold. "That is not true!" she shrieked, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "Nash is in Dubai. He is building the future. I spoke to him this morning. That was my cue. I didn't run in. I didn't shout. I simply placed my hand on the heavy brass handle of the main ballroom doors. I looked at the young valet standing next to me, a boy about the same age Nash was when I taught him to drive. "Open it," I said softly. The doors swung outward with a groan of heavy hinges, a sound that cut through Tiffany's frantic denials like a gavel striking a block. I stepped into the doorway. I wasn't wearing a tuxedo. I was wearing my Sunday suit, the one I wore to funerals and baptisms. And in front of me, gripping the armrests of a wheelchair I had borrowed from the hotel concierge, sat my son. Nash. He looked like a ghost who had clawed his way out of the grave to attend his own wake. The suit hung loosely on his frame, hiding the jutting ribs and the bruises from the restraints. His skin was the color of ash, contrasting sharply with the dark fabric, but his head was up, his chin was set, and his eyes, those eyes that Tiffany claimed were empty and demented, were burning with a cold blue fire. I pushed the chair forward. The wheels hummed on the polished marble floor. It was a long walk to the stage down the center aisle past the round tables with their expensive centerpieces and half-eaten dinners. The crowd parted. People stood up not out of respect but out of shock. They gasped. Hands covered mouths. Whispers rippled through the room like wind through dry grass. "My God, is that him? He looks half dead. I thought she said he was overseas." We moved steadily, inexorably toward the woman who had stolen 4 years of our lives. I kept my eyes locked on her. I wanted her to see me. I wanted her to see the mailman she had called a nobody. I wanted her to see the father she thought she could bury. Tiffany stopped screaming. She froze. Her mouth hung open, her eyes wide and unblinking. She looked from me to the man in the wheelchair, and for a moment I saw her brain trying to reject the reality before her. She blinked rapidly as if hoping we would disappear when she opened her eyes again. "No," she whispered the microphone, picking up the sound of her terror. "No, that is not him." She grabbed the podium with both hands, leaning forward, shouting at the crowd. "Do not be fooled. Look at him. That is an imposter. My father-in-law has hired an actor. Look at the makeup. It is a trick. Nash is athletic. Nash is strong. That cripple is not my husband." I felt Nash tense in the chair. The word cripple hit him like a physical blow, but he didn't flinch. He just raised a hand. his fingers trembling slightly, and gestured for the microphone stand that had been left near the edge of the stage by the previous speaker. I pushed him right up to the base of the stage. We were 10 feet below her now. The angle made her look like a queen looking down on her subjects, but tonight, the power was coming from the floor. Nash reached out. He grabbed the mic stand. He didn't have the strength to lift it, so he pulled the microphone off the clip. The feedback whined for a second, a sharp screech that made everyone wince. He brought the mic to his lips. His hand was shaking, but his voice was the sound of gravel grinding against steel. "Hello, Tiffany," he rasped. The sound of his voice, undeniably the voice she had heard in her bed for 10 years, hit her like a physical slap. She recoiled, stumbling back against the projection screen. "You are not real," she hissed. "You are in Shady Oaks. You are supposed to be—" Vegetable Nash finished the sentence for her, his breath rattling in his chest. "Is that the word you use to Dr. Thorne?" "A vegetable." He took a deep, shuddering breath, gathering every ounce of strength he had left. "I am sorry to disappoint you, honey," he said, the endearment dripping with venom. "But I am back from my business trip. It turns out the flight from hell is a little shorter than you calculated." The crowd erupted. Someone shouted, "He is alive!" Someone else yelled, "Call the police!" Tiffany looked around wildly. She was losing control of the narrative, and for a narcissist, that is a fate worse than death. She pointed at me. "He did this, the old man. He drugged him. He kidnapped him from the facility. He is abusing him. I am his wife. I am his guardian." She lunged toward the edge of the stage, her face twisted into a mask of ugly desperation. "Security! Get them out of here. That man is a danger to my husband. I have a restraining order." She was playing her last card, the legal card, the paper shield she had hidden behind for 4 years. She thought that if she screamed loud enough about the law would protect her. But she had forgotten who my friends were. I didn't answer her. I didn't have to. I just turned my head slightly to the left toward the heavy velvet curtains that lined the side of the ballroom. "You can come out now, Chief," I said clearly. The curtains parted. Chief Miller stepped out. He wasn't wearing his dress uniform. He was wearing his tactical vest. And he wasn't alone. Behind him were 4 officers, their hands resting on their holsters. Tiffany's face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. She knew Chief Miller. She had donated to his re-election campaign. She had charmed him at luncheons. She thought he was her ally. Miller walked up the steps to the stage. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked straight at Tiffany. He held up a piece of paper. It wasn't a donation check. "Tiffany Carter," he boomed, his voice projecting without a microphone. "I have a warrant here for your immediate arrest." Tiffany laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "Miller, don't be ridiculous. This is a misunderstanding. Let's go to your office and talk about this. I can explain. The old man is—" "The charges," Miller continued, cutting her off, his voice hard as granite, "are as follows. Kidnapping, false imprisonment, elder abuse, wire fraud, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit murder." "Conspiracy!" she shrieked. "I never touched him." "We have the gas line," Tiffany Miller said, stepping closer. "The bomb squad found the timer. And we have the email, the one you sent to Dr. Thorne 10 minutes ago. We intercepted him at the airfield. He is in custody, and he is singing like a bird to cut a deal." The mention of Dr. Thorne broke her. Her knees buckled. She grabbed the podium to keep from falling. "He is lying," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. Real tears this time, tears of self-pity. "He forced me. It was his idea. I am a victim here." 2 officers moved in. They grabbed her arms. "Get your hands off me," she screamed, thrashing like a trapped animal. "Do you know who I am? I am Tiffany Carter. I own this city." I watched from the floor as they spun her around. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It was better than any symphony. It was the sound of justice closing its jaws. Nash leaned back in his wheelchair. He lowered the microphone. He didn't smile. He just watched his face, a mask of weary satisfaction. As they dragged her across the stage, her red dress bunching up her heels, scraping the floor, she locked eyes with me one last time. "Reggie," she screamed, "Daddy, please tell them we are family." I looked at her. I looked at the woman I had welcomed into my home, the woman I had trusted with my son's life. I stepped forward, placing my hand on Nash's shoulder. "Family doesn't poison family, Tiffany. I said, my voice calm and steady amidst the chaos. They hauled her down the stairs. The guests pulled back as if she were contagious. The flashing blue lights of the police cruisers were visible through the ballroom windows, now painting the walls in frantic strokes of color. Chief Miller stopped in front of us. He looked at Nash, then at me. He took off his cap. "I am sorry it took so long, Reggie," he said quietly. I shook his head. "You got here just in time, Miller. Just in time." I looked down at Nash. He was slumped in the chair, his energy spent. But he reached up and patted my hand. "We did it, Dad," he whispered. "Yeah, son," I said, feeling the tears finally start to sting my own eyes. "We did it." But as the police escorted Tiffany out the double doors, screaming curses at the cameras that were now flashing in her face, I knew it wasn't over. The battle was won, but the war for survival had just begun. We had no money. We had no home. And the woman who destroyed us had hidden the assets in a web of offshore accounts that might take years to untangle. I looked at the crowd of wealthy donors staring at us. They looked pitying. They looked horrified. I didn't want their pity. I grabbed the handles of the wheelchair. "Let's go, Nash," I said. "We have one more stop to make." "Where, Dad?" he asked weakly. "The bank," I said. "If Dr. Thorne is singing, I want to be there for the encore. We are going to find that money, son. Every single dime." The ballroom of the Grand Hyatt is usually reserved for weddings and debutante balls, places where dreams are celebrated. But tonight, under the glow of 1,000 crystals, we were witnessing a funeral. Not of a person, but of a lie. Tiffany Carter stood near the service entrance, her back against the wall, trapped by the very men she thought she owned. The red dress that was supposed to be her victory banner now looked like a target. She looked at Chief Miller, then at me, and then her eyes darted to the guests who were recording everything on their phones. The panic in her chest was visible, heaving against the silk of her gown. She took a deep breath, and for a split second I saw her try to put the mask back on. She straightened her spine. She smoothed her hair. She tried to summon the ghost of the charming philanthropic socialite one last time. "Chief Miller," she said, her voice shaking but loud enough for the room to hear. "This is absurd. You are making a mistake that will cost the city millions in lawsuits. That man, Dr. Thorne, he is the criminal. He manipulated me. He told me Nash was sick. He told me he needed specialized care. I was just a worried wife following medical advice. If there was fraud, I am the victim too." I watched her, marveling at the sheer audacity of her soul. Even with the noose tightening, she was trying to push someone else off the ledge to save herself. She was painting herself as the naive, trusting spouse throwing her lover to the wolves without a second thought. Miller didn't blink. He didn't step back. He reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He held it up, and the silence in the room became heavy, suffocating. "Save your breath," Tiffany Miller said, his voice flat and tired. "We picked up Julian Thorne at the Peachtree DeKalb Airport 40 minutes ago. He was loading 3 suitcases of cash onto a chartered jet." Tiffany's eyes widened. She shook her head slightly. "No, he wouldn't." "He did." Miller continued, stepping into her personal space. "And the moment we put the cuffs on him, the moment he realized he was facing 20 years for kidnapping and narcotics distribution, he started talking. He didn't just talk, Tiffany. He sang. He gave us everything. The emails, the forged medical charts, the video logs of him coaching you on how to drug your husband. He even gave us the receipt for the gas timer you bought at the hardware store last week." The color drained from Tiffany's face so completely she looked like a wax figure. The narrative she was trying to spin, the story of the innocent wife, evaporated instantly. Thorne hadn't just betrayed her. He had buried her to cut a deal for himself. "There is no deal for you," Tiffany Miller said. "Thorne is turning state's evidence. You are the mastermind. You are the one who signed the checks. You are the one who filed the false police reports. And you are the one who left a bomb in a house in a residential neighborhood." The crowd gasped again. The word bomb hung in the air, terrified and real. The wealthy donors who had been drinking her champagne suddenly realized they had been toasting a terrorist. Miller nodded to his officers. "Take her into custody." 2 officers moved forward. They were big men, not the type to be charmed by a smile or a tear. They grabbed Tiffany's arms. That was the moment the dam broke. The sophisticated, articulate woman who had charmed Atlanta society vanished. In her place was something feral, something ugly and raw. She didn't go quietly. She screamed. "Get your hands off me!" She kicked out her high heel, connecting with the shin of one of the officers. She thrashed, twisting her body, trying to bite the hand that held her wrist. It was a display of pure, unadulterated rage. She was cursing, using words that would make a sailor blush, screaming obscenities at the police, at the guests, at the world that dared to tell her no. "You are hurting me." Police brutality. "Someone film this. I am Tiffany Carter. I am a pillar of this community. You work for me. My taxes pay your salary, you pigs." It was pathetic. It was horrifying. And it was deeply, deeply satisfying. I watched as they spun her around. She was fighting so hard that the strap of her expensive red dress snapped, hanging loosely off her shoulder. Her hair, which had been perfectly coiffed, was now a wild mane around her face. Her makeup was smeared. She looked like exactly what she was, a criminal who had been caught. One officer forced her arms behind her back. She bent forward, spitting on the marble floor. Click. The sound of the handcuffs locking was sharp and final. Click. The second cuff locked. She let out a howl of frustration, a sound that wasn't human. It was the sound of a demon being dragged back to hell. Chief Miller stepped in front of her. He pulled a small card from his pocket and began to read. He didn't rush. He wanted her to hear every word. He wanted the room to hear every word. "Tiffany Carter, you are under arrest for the kidnapping and false imprisonment of Nash Carter." "I didn't do it," she screamed. For the grand larceny of the Carter family estate, Miller continued raising his voice over hers. For wire fraud, for identity theft, for the physical abuse of a vulnerable adult, and for the attempted murder of Reginald Carter and Nash Carter via arson and explosives. Attempted, she spat, her eyes wild. "You can't prove intent." "It was a gas leak. It was an accident." Miller ignored her. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I stood there, my hand resting on Nash's shoulder. I could feel him trembling. Not from fear, but from release. He was watching the monster who had tormented him for 4 years being reduced to a common criminal. He was watching the woman who had made him feel powerless being stripped of all her power. The officers began to march her toward the exit. The crowd parted, shrinking away from her as if she were radioactive. No one offered to help. No one shouted a defense. The friends she thought she had, the social climbers who had surrounded her, they all turned their backs. They were already rewriting their memories, pretending they never really knew her. But Tiffany wasn't done. As they dragged her past us, she dug her heels into the carpet, forcing the officers to stop for a second. She was panting, her chest heaving. She looked at Nash. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were black holes of hate. There was no remorse there, no regret, only a cold, burning fury that she had lost the game. And then she smiled. It wasn't the fake, sweet smile she used for cameras. It was a jagged, broken smile, a smile of pure spite. "You think you won, don't you, old man?" She rasped, her voice dripping with venom. "You think because you put these cuffs on me you have your life back." She laughed, a low, guttural sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Look at you. You are wearing a suit that smells like mothballs. You are driving a truck that barely runs. And your son, look at him. He is a shell." "Shut your mouth," I said, my voice steady. "No, you listen to me," she screamed, leaning in as far as the officers would let her. "You have the house. Congratulations. It is a pile of bricks. But where is the money, Reggie? Where is the 4 years of savings? Where is the equity? Where is the $600,000 from the closing?" She threw her head back and cackled. "It is gone. It is all gone. I moved it 3 hours ago. It is in a shell company in the Cook Islands. It is in crypto wallets you will never find. Even Thorne doesn't have the keys. Only I do." She stared at me, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "You can rot in that house, Reggie. You can starve. You will never see a dime. I will sit in prison and smile every day knowing that I left you destitute. You beat me, but you are broke. You are nothing." The officers yanked her forward, forcing her toward the door. "I am rich. Do you hear me? I am still rich. You are the beggars." Her voice faded as they pushed her through the double doors and into the waiting police cruiser. The flashing blue lights illuminated the ballroom one last time, casting long, dancing shadows across the terrified faces of the guests. Then silence returned. It was a heavy, awkward silence. The kind of silence that happens when a tragedy has ended, but the healing hasn't begun. I looked down at Nash. His face was pale. The adrenaline that had sustained him was crashing. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a new kind of fear. "Dad," he whispered, "is she telling the truth? The money, is it really gone?" I looked at the closed doors. I thought about the empty bank accounts. I thought about the medical bills that would be coming for Nash's recovery. I thought about the lawyer fees. She was right about one thing. She had moved the money. She was efficient, I would give her that. But she was wrong about me being nothing. I looked at my son. I looked at the man who had survived 4 years of hell and still had the courage to stand up. I squeezed his shoulder. She moved the money, Nash, I said quietly, but she forgot that I delivered mail for 30 years. I know how things move. I know how to track them. And I know that nothing disappears completely. I turned to the crowd. They were still staring. Show is over, folks, I said, my voice echoing in the large room. Go home to your families. And check your bank accounts. You never know who you are sleeping next to. I turned the wheelchair around. Let's go, son, I said. Where Dad? Nash asked. To the police station. No, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. We are going to the bank. Specifically, the safety deposit box she didn't know about. The one your mother opened 20 years ago. The one I never told anyone about. Nash looked confused. But Mom didn't have any money. No, she didn't, I said, pushing him toward the exit. But she had something better. She had journals. She wrote down everything, Nash. Every account number Tiffany ever left lying around on the kitchen counter when she thought we weren't looking. Your mother was suspicious of her from day one. I felt a surge of energy. Tiffany thought she had hidden the treasure map. She didn't know my wife had been drawing a copy of it for years. We are going to get it all back, I said. Every single penny. And as we rolled out of the Grand Hyatt, leaving the shattered remains of Tiffany's reputation behind us, I knew the real work was just beginning. But for the first time in 4 years, I wasn't afraid. I was Reggie Carter. And I always deliver. The blue lights of the police cruisers had faded into the distance, taking Tiffany and her red dress to a cell where the only audience she would have was a concrete wall. We were left standing in the driveway of my home, the house that Nash and I had built, the house that had almost become our tomb. The bomb squad had given the all-clear, cutting the gas line and removing the timer Tiffany had bought from the hardware store. The physical danger was gone, but as we walked through the front door, a new, colder reality settled over us like a wet blanket. The house was a wreck. In her frantic search for cash before fleeing, Tiffany had torn the place apart. Cushions were slashed. Drawers were overturned. The safe in the study, which I had installed 20 years ago, was hanging open, its door slightly off its hinges. It was empty. Not a bond, not a deed, not a single dollar bill remained. She hadn't been lying in the ballroom. She had cleaned us out. I helped Nash to the sofa, stepping over shattered picture frames and piles of clothes. He sank into the cushions, his adrenaline crash hitting him hard. He was shivering again, his skin clammy. He needed medicine. Real medicine, not the poison Dr. Thorne had been pumping into his veins. He needed a neurologist to assess the damage to his brain. He needed high-calorie food to put flesh back on his bones. I went to the kitchen to check the refrigerator. It was empty, save for a bottle of expensive champagne and a jar of caviar, Tiffany's diet. There was no milk, no eggs, nothing that could sustain a recovering man. I pulled out my wallet. I had $40 in cash. That was it. My pension account was frozen pending the fraud investigation. The savings were gone. The $600,000 from the fake sale was just a prop, a piece of paper Elias had printed to bait the trap. We were sitting in a house worth $500,000, but we couldn't afford a loaf of bread. We won the war, Dad Nash whispered from the living room, his voice weak. But we lost the peace. I walked back in, trying to put on a brave face. We will figure it out, son. I can sell the truck. It won't bring much, but it will buy us groceries for a month. And then what Nash asked, looking at his trembling hands. Look at me. I can't work. I can't even hold a pen steady. The therapy alone is going to cost thousands. And you gave everything you had to her. He began to weep, a quiet, hopeless sound. She won, Dad. She is in jail, but she left us to starve in the ruins. She is probably laughing right now. I wanted to comfort him, but I knew he was right. Justice feeds the soul, but it doesn't pay the light bill. I sat down on the coffee table, head in my hands, feeling the crushing weight of 72 years and a total financial restart. Then from the corner of the room, Dante spoke up. He had been so quiet I had almost forgotten he was there. He was standing by the door, holding the plastic bag I had brought back from the safe house. She didn't get everything, Dante said. I looked up. What are you talking about, Dante? The safe is empty. Dante reached into the bag and pulled out the object that started this whole nightmare. The burner phone. The cheap, battered Nokia with the cracked screen wrapped in black electrical tape. You kept this, Dante said, holding it out to Nash. You threw this into my truck at Shady Oaks. You risked your life to get this out. Why? I frowned. It was just a burner phone, Dante. He used it to send the text message. No, Dante insisted, shaking his head. He could have written a note. He could have shouted. But he threw this specific phone, and when I held it, it felt heavier than a normal plastic phone. Nash looked at the device. His eyes narrowed. He reached out and took it. His fingers brushed the cracked plastic casing. A spark of recognition flickered in his gaze, cutting through the fog of the drugs. It is not a burner phone, Nash murmured. He turned it over. He pressed his thumbnails into the seam of the battery case and popped the back open. There was no battery inside. Instead, the space was filled with a small silver hard drive soldered directly into the motherboard, taped down with Captain tape. It is a cold storage wallet, Nash said, his voice gaining strength. I leaned in. A what? 5 years ago, Nash said, his eyes scanning the room as memories began to flood back. Before the clinic. Before she took control. I started to suspect her. I saw bills for jewelry I didn't buy. I saw withdrawals I didn't make. I knew she was bleeding us. He looked up at me. I knew if I left the money in the bank, she would find a way to get it. She had my passwords. She had my social security number. So I started skimming. Skimming, I asked. Every big project I landed, every bonus, every dividend. I took 20% off the top before it hit the joint account. I told her business expenses were up. I told her the market was down. She believed me because she doesn't understand math. She only understands spending. And what did you do with the money? Dante asked, his eyes wide. I bought Bitcoin, Nash said, and Ethereum, and a few others that looked promising. This was 5 years ago, Dad, before the big boom. I put it all on this hardware wallet. I disguised it as a piece of junk technology because I knew Tiffany would never touch it. She hates old things. She hates anything that isn't the newest iPhone. He held the battered Nokia up like it was a holy relic. She looked in the safe. She looked under the mattress. She ripped up the floorboards. But she walked right past this phone 100 times. To her, it was trash. To me, it was our lifeboat. My heart started to pound. How much, Nash? How much is in there? Nash closed his eyes, doing the mental math. I put in about $50,000 over 2 years. If the market has done what I think it has done... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. If he had bought $50,000 worth of crypto 5 years ago, we weren't just looking at rent money. We were looking at a fortune. Plug it in, Dante said, rushing to get the laptop. We connected the modified phone to the computer using a cable Nash found in the drawer. The screen lit up. It wasn't the snake game. A black terminal window popped up with a single blinking green cursor. Enter decryption key. The room went silent. This was it. The barrier between poverty and salvation. Nash leaned forward. He cracked his knuckles. I saw the ghost of the brilliant engineer he used to be. He placed his hands on the keyboard. I need the password, I said gently. I know it, Nash said. I created it. It is a phrase. A 32-character alphanumeric string. I made it something she would never guess. Something only I would know. He started to type. REGGIE 1952. He stopped. He hit the backspace key. No, that is not it, he muttered. That is too simple. He tried again. BLUEPRINTSATL. He stopped again. His breathing started to get shallow. Sweat popped out on his forehead. Nash, take your time, I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. I can't remember the end. He panicked, his voice rising. I know the beginning. But the end, it is fuzzy. It is like there is a wall in my head. The drugs, Dante whispered. The haloperidol. It messes with memory recall. Nash slammed his fist onto the table. Think. It was something about the cabin. No, it was something about Mom. He typed a third sequence. He hit enter. Access denied. 2 attempts remaining. The text on the screen was red and unforgiving. 2 attempts. Nash gasped, pulling his hands away from the keyboard as if it were hot. If I get it wrong 2 more times, the drive wipes itself. It is a security feature. It deletes the private keys. The money will be gone forever. He looked at me, terror in his eyes. The terror of a man who sees the lifeboat drifting away. Dad, I can't do it. My brain, it is broken. The doctor, he scrambled me. It is right there on the tip of my tongue, but I can't reach it. He buried his face in his hands. I stared at the screen. 2 attempts. A fortune locked away in a plastic box guarded by a damaged mind. Tiffany had stolen his memory, and in doing so, she might have stolen our future after all. I looked at the blinking cursor. It mocked us. It was a digital safe, and we had lost the combination in the fog of trauma. Don't type another letter, I said, closing the laptop lid gently. Not until you are sure. But what if I never remember? Nash sobbed. What if she took that too? Then we wait, I said, though my own heart was sinking. We wait for the fog to clear. But as I looked around the ruined house at the empty fridge and the pile of unpaid bills that would be arriving tomorrow, I knew we couldn't wait long. We were sitting on a gold mine, but without that password, we were just 3 broke men in a broken house waiting for the lights to go out. We sat in the ruins of our living room, the silence broken only by the hum of the laptop fan. 2 attempts remaining. That was the barrier standing between us and a future. My son, the engineer who used to memorize blueprints after one glance, was now sobbing into his hands, his memory fractured by the chemicals Tiffany and Dr. Thorne had pumped into his veins. He knew the password was a key to his past, a specific alphanumeric string he had created to protect us, but the fog was too thick. He was drowning in his own mind. I looked at the blinking cursor. I looked at the Nokia phone. And then I looked at the pile of debris Tiffany had left behind. She had taken the paintings. She had taken the silver. She had even taken the antique clock from the mantel. But in the corner of the room, kicked over and spilling its contents onto the rug, was an old, battered cardboard box. It was marked with my handwriting in black marker. Nash, childhood. Tiffany had dumped it out, likely looking for savings bonds or cash hidden between the pages of old yearbooks. Finding only paper and sentimental trash, she had left it there. To her, memories had no market value. To her, the past was just weight to be shed. I walked over to the pile. I picked up a spelling bee ribbon from 3rd grade, a photograph of Nash losing his first tooth. And then at the bottom of the pile, I saw it. A bundle of letters tied together with a rubber band. I remembered these letters. Nash wrote them to me during the summer he went to engineering camp when he was 12. He was homesick. He wrote to me every day. But there was one letter, one specific letter that he had framed and kept on his desk until he went to college. He had put it back in the box years ago for safekeeping. I pulled the rubber band off. My hands were shaking. I shuffled through the envelopes until I found the one dated October 14th, 1998. Nash, I said softly, walking back to the table. Do you remember what happened on October 14th, 1998? Nash looked up, wiping his eyes. He frowned, the gears in his mind grinding against the rust. 98. I was 12. I opened the letter. The paper was yellowed, the ink fading. I began to read aloud. Dear Dad, today was the best day of my life. I saw you on the stage. The mayor shook your hand. He gave you the medal. You saved that lady from the burning house on your route. You didn't wait for the firemen. You just went in. Everyone calls you a hero. But to me, you are the man who builds bridges where there are none. I want to be like you. I want to build things that save people. I stopped reading. I looked at Nash. He wasn't crying anymore. He was staring at the letter, his mouth slightly open. I remember he whispered. I handed him the letter. You wrote a phrase at the bottom, I said. You underlined it 3 times. You used to use it as your email password when you were in high school. You said it was the code that reminded you of who you wanted to be. Nash looked at the bottom of the page. He traced the words with his trembling finger. The day my father became a giant. He looked at the laptop. He looked at me. That is it, he said, his voice gaining traction. But it is not just the words. It is the date, too, and the medal number. I combined them. It was the only string of numbers and letters I knew by heart that Tiffany would never know because she never asked about your life. She never asked about the medal. He moved his hands to the keyboard. This time, there was no hesitation. The muscle memory was reconnecting with the emotional memory. He typed, THEFNY, GIANT1014988M0H452. He paused. His finger hovered over the enter key. If this is wrong, Dad, the drive wipes, he said, the fear creeping back in. I put my hand over his. It isn't wrong, son, because that was the day we became a team. And teams don't forget. We pressed the enter key together. The screen went black for a second. My heart stopped. I thought we had lost it. I thought the fail-safe had triggered and erased the only hope we had left. Then a green line of text appeared. Decryption successful, mounting drive. A window popped up. It was a digital wallet interface. Simple. Stark. Loading balance. The spinner turned, round and round. I held my breath. Nash gripped the edge of the table so hard I thought the wood would splinter. The numbers appeared. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. I expected to see $50,000, maybe 60. Maybe if we were lucky, 100,000 enough to pay off the medical bills and fix the roof. I didn't see 100,000. I saw $2,482,314. Nash gasped a sound that sucked all the air out of the room. Reggie Dante whispered from the doorway, his eyes wide as saucers. Is that a decimal point or a comma? It is a comma, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Nash fell back against the sofa laughing. It was a hysterical, broken, beautiful laugh. He laughed until tears streamed down his face. She missed it, he choked out. She took the cash. She took the car. She took the house deed. But she left the phone. She threw it in the trash, Dad. She looked right at $2 million and called it garbage because it didn't shine. I stared at the screen. The graph showed the growth. While Nash was rotting in Shady Oaks, while Tiffany was spending our cash on wine and first-class tickets, the digital assets in this cold storage wallet had been quietly sitting in the dark, multiplying. The Bitcoin he bought at $4,000 was now worth $60. The Ethereum was up 10 times. We aren't broke, Nash said, looking at me with a reverence I hadn't seen in years. Dad, we can buy the house back 10 times over. We can hire the best neurologists in the country. We can breathe. I reached out and closed the laptop. We are going to do more than breathe, son, I said. We are going to build. We sat there for a long time, just letting the reality wash over us. The fear of poverty, the crushing weight of the unknown, it all lifted. We were safe. We had the resources to heal. We had the means to make sure Tiffany stayed behind bars forever. Dante went out to pick up pizza, the most expensive extra-large pizza he could find. We ate on the floor of the ruined living room, drinking tap water out of coffee mugs because all the wine glasses were broken. It was the best meal I had ever tasted. But just as I was starting to believe that the storm had truly passed, just as I was allowing myself to relax, the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, intrusive sound that made us all jump. "Who is that?" Nash asked, freezing with a slice of pizza halfway to his mouth. "The police are done. The press is gone." "Maybe it is a neighbor," I said, standing up, coming to apologize for believing the lies. I walked to the door. I felt light. I felt invincible. I opened it with a smile, ready to accept an apology or tell a reporter to get off my lawn. But it wasn't a neighbor, and it wasn't a reporter. Standing on my porch was a man in a cheap suit holding a leather briefcase. He looked bored. Behind him, parked at the curb, was a black sedan with tinted windows. "Reginald Carter?" the man asked, looking at a paper in his hand. "That is me. You have been served," he said, thrusting a thick envelope into my chest. I took it, confused. "What is this?" "Emergency custody hearing," the man said, turning to walk away. "The plaintiffs are requesting immediate temporary custody of the minor child Leo Carter and a freeze on all assets belonging to the estate of Nash Carter, pending a competency review." Leo, my grandson. I felt the blood drain from my face. Leo had been living with Tiffany's parents in Savannah for the last 2 years. Tiffany had sent him there claiming Nash was too sick to be around children and she was too busy caring for him. I hadn't seen my grandson in 24 months. I tore open the envelope. My hands, which had been steady when I faced down the police, were shaking now. I scanned the legal jargon. Plaintiffs George and Martha Vance. Defendant Nash Carter incapacitated and Reginald Carter. Motion permanent custody and control of estate assets. The Vances. Tiffany's parents. The people who had raised a monster. They weren't coming to help. They were coming to finish what their daughter started. I looked at the black sedan at the curb. The window rolled down just an inch. I saw a pair of eyes watching me. Cold, calculating eyes. Martha Vance. She knew. She knew Tiffany was in jail. She knew the house scheme had failed, so she was pivoting. She was going for the one thing we couldn't fight with money alone. She was going for the child. And through the child, she wanted control of the fortune we had just unlocked. I walked back into the house. The joy of the $2 million evaporated. "What is it?" Dad Nash asked, seeing my face. I threw the papers on the table right next to the laptop. "It is your in-laws," I said, my voice turning to ice. "They are suing for custody of Leo, and they are claiming you are mentally unfit to be a father." Nash went pale. "Leo," he whispered. "My boy." "They want the money, Nash," I said. "They know Tiffany is done. Now they are trying to use your son as a bargaining chip to get their hands on the crypto. They think we are weak. They think we are tired." I looked at the laptop, then at the lawsuit. "They are right about one thing," I said, grabbing my coat again. "We are tired. But they are wrong about us being weak." I looked at Dante. "Don't get comfortable, son," I said. "We have a road trip to make." "Where?" Dante asked. "Savannah," I replied. "We are going to get my grandson, and I don't care how many lawyers they have. No one takes a Carter. The war wasn't over. It had just moved to a new battlefield, and this time we weren't fighting for a house. We were fighting for the future." The drive to Savannah was long and quiet. We had money now. We could have chartered a plane, flown first class, and sipped champagne at 30,000 feet. But we took my old truck. We drove it because we needed the time to think, and because there is something about the hum of tires on asphalt that keeps a man honest. Nash sat in the passenger seat reading the custody filing over and over again until the paper was soft and worn in his hands. He looked better. The food, the sleep, and the absence of poison were doing their work. But his eyes were haunted. He was terrified that he had lost his son, not to death but to a lie. George and Martha Vance lived in a gated community that smelled of magnolia blossoms and exclusion. Their house wasn't a home, it was a museum. White columns, manicured hedges, and a driveway filled with cars that were never driven. When we pulled up in my rusted Ford, the security guard looked at us like we were delivering mulch. We weren't there to beg, we were there for the court-mandated supervised visitation. 1 hour, that was all the judge had granted us pending the final hearing. 1 hour to undo 2 years of brainwashing. We sat in their formal living room, a room where the furniture looked too expensive to sit on. Martha Vance sat in a wingback chair sipping iced tea, watching us with the cold detachment of a reptile. Leo came in a few minutes later. My heart broke the moment I saw him. He was 10 years old, but he looked like a miniature accountant. He was wearing khakis and a polo shirt buttoned to the top. His hair was gelled back stiffly. There was no dirt under his fingernails. There were no scabs on his knees. He looked perfect, and he looked miserable. "Hello, Leo," Nash said, his voice trembling. Leo didn't run to him. He didn't smile. He stood by the door, his hands clasped behind his back, looking at his father with fear. "Grandmother says you are sick," Leo said, his voice flat. "She says you have a disease in your brain that makes you dangerous." Nash flinched. Martha smirked behind her tea glass. "I am not sick anymore," Leo, Nash said gently. I was away. But I am back now." Leo looked at me. "And who is he?" "I am your grandfather's son," I said, leaning forward. "I am Reggie. We used to build Lego towers together when you were 3. "I don't remember that," Leo said, stepping back. "Grandfather George says you are a poor man who wants to steal my inheritance. He says I shouldn't talk to you." I looked at Martha. She didn't even blink. She was poisoning the well drop by drop. She didn't care about Leo. She cared about the trust fund Nash had set up for him, the one that was linked to the crypto wallet. We spent that hour sitting in uncomfortable silence. Every time we tried to engage him, Leo recited a script he had clearly memorized. "My life is here. I have a pony. I have a tutor. I don't want to go to Atlanta." When we left, Nash punched the dashboard of the truck. "It is over, Dad," he cried. "They have him. He hates us. We can't fight that. We don't fight it with words," I said, starting the engine. "We fight it with dirt." "What?" "We have visitation rights for the next 3 weekends," I said. "They think they can win by buying him things, but you can't buy a boy's heart, Nash. You have to earn it. Next weekend we aren't coming to this house. We are taking him out, and we are going to show him the difference between a trust fund and a father." The following Saturday we picked Leo up. He was holding an iPad and wearing brand new designer sneakers. He looked bored. "Where are we going?" he sighed, not looking up from his screen. The country club. No, I said. We are going to the marsh. We drove to a public pier, a place where the wood was weathered and the air smelled of salt and mud. I took the iPad from him. Hey, he protested. I need that. You need hands for what we are doing, I said, handing him a simple cane fishing pole. For the first hour, Leo was petulant. He complained about the heat. He complained about the smell. He complained that his shoes were getting dirty. Nash was patient. He baited the hook. He cast the line. He spoke to his son not about the lawsuit or the money, but about the water. You have to feel the tide, Leo, Nash explained, his voice calm. The fish don't care how rich you are. They only care if you are patient. Leo rolled his eyes. This is stupid. Grandfather George buys me fish at the restaurant. It is easier. That is the problem, son, I said. Easy makes you soft, and the world eats soft men. Suddenly the bobber dipped. Leo's eyes went wide. The pole bent. I got one, he screamed. Help me. Take it, no, Nash said, stepping back. It is your line. You bring it in. But it is heavy. Pull, Leo, Nash encouraged him. Fight it. Leo gritted his teeth. The gel in his hair was melting. Sweat was running down his face. He planted his feet in the mud and pulled. A small silver mullet flopped onto the deck. It wasn't a trophy fish. It was barely 6 inches long, but Leo looked at it like it was a whale. He looked at his hands covered in fish scales and mud. Then he looked at Nash. I did that, Leo whispered. You did that. Nash smiled. By the third weekend, the iPad was gone. Leo was wearing old jeans. He learned how to throw a curveball. He learned how to change a tire on the truck. He learned that his father wasn't a monster, but a man who had survived a monster. We didn't badmouth the Vances. We didn't have to. We just gave him something they never did. We gave him presence. We gave him the feeling of being capable, not just being owned. Then came the court date. The courtroom was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the warm mud of the marsh. The Vances had hired a team of 3 lawyers. They were sharks in expensive suits. They laid out their case with brutal efficiency. They brought up Nash's time in Shady Oaks. They brought up my kidnapping of him. They painted a picture of 2 unstable, dangerous men who were unfit to raise a hamster, let alone a child. Martha Vance took the stand. She cried. She talked about how traumatized Leo was. She talked about how they were the only ones who could provide him with stability and a private school education. It looked bad. The judge, a stern woman with glasses, looked at us with skepticism. Mr. Carter, the judge said to me, you have a criminal record pending investigation for the incident at the Hyatt. Your son has a documented history of psychiatric treatment. Why should I grant you custody? Because, Your Honor. I stood up. A medical chart doesn't make a father, and a bank account doesn't make a home. We aren't perfect. We have scars, but those scars are proof that we fought to be here. The judge sighed. She looked at the Vance's lawyer, and she looked at Leo. Leo was sitting in the back, swinging his legs. He was wearing the suit Martha had forced him into, but I noticed something. On his wrist, he was wearing a braided bracelet made of fishing line that Nash had taught him to make. I would like to speak to the child, the judge said. In chambers. No. Leo said, standing up. His voice was small, but it was clear. I want to say it here. The Vance's lawyer jumped up. Your Honor, the child is a minor. He has been coached. Sit down, counselor, the judge ordered. She turned to Leo. Go ahead, son. You can speak. Leo walked to the front of the room. He didn't look at Martha. He looked at Nash. Grandmother gives me everything I want, Leo said. She buys me toys. She buys me clothes. She tells me I am special because we have money. Martha smiled smugly, but Leo continued looking at his hands. She never taught me how to fix anything. She never let me get dirty. When I am with her, I feel like a doll in a box. He pointed at Nash. My dad, he didn't buy me anything. We ate pizza on the floor, but he showed me how to catch a fish. He showed me how to stand up when I fall down. Leo took a deep breath. Grandmother says my dad is broken, but he isn't. He is just fixing himself, and I want to help him. I don't want to be in a museum anymore. I want to go fishing. I want to be with my dad and grandpa. The courtroom was silent. Martha Vance's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. She gripped George's arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. The judge looked at the Vances, then at us. She took off her glasses. The court finds that while the financial stability of the maternal grandparents is not in question, the emotional needs of the child are paramount. It is the opinion of this court that Mr. Nash Carter having provided clean toxicology reports and proof of financial independence, is the fit and proper guardian. Custody is granted to the father effective immediately. Nash let out a sob that echoed off the walls. He ran to Leo and hugged him, lifting him off the ground. Leo buried his face in his father's neck. I looked at the Vances. They were gathering their papers, their movements sharp and angry. They hadn't lost a grandson. They had lost an asset. They had lost the key to the Carter fortune. We walked out of the courthouse into the bright Savannah sun. The air tasted sweet. Martha Vance was waiting for us by her limousine. She wasn't crying anymore. Her eyes were dry and hard as flint. She stepped in front of me as I walked to the truck. "You think this is over, Reggie?" she hissed. "I think the judge said it was over, Martha." "Judges can be bought," she said, her voice low. "And appeals can take years. We have money you can't even dream of. We will bury you in litigation. We will make your life a living hell. You might have the boy today, but you will never have peace." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who valued control over love. "We have $2.4 million in crypto that says we can afford a very long fight, Martha," I said, leaning in close. "And unlike you, we aren't fighting for money. We are fighting for blood. So go ahead. Appeal. But remember one thing." "What is that?" she sneered. "I am a mailman," I said, smiling. "I am used to dealing with dogs that bark at the gate." I walked past her, got into my truck, and watched in the rearview mirror as she stood there, small and angry, while her world drove away without her. We had the boy, we had the money, and for the first time we had the future. It has been 365 days since I pushed a wheelchair out of the Grand Hyatt and into a new life. A year is a long time. It is enough time for the seasons to change 4 times, enough time for a baby to learn to walk, and enough time for a broken man to glue the pieces of his soul back together. I stood on the second-floor balcony of the old brick warehouse we had bought in the West End. It used to be a textile factory full of noise and dust. Now the walls were painted a soft, calming blue. The floors were polished concrete. And the noise wasn't the clatter of machines, but the low, steady murmur of men talking. Men healing. Down below in the main atrium, I watched Nash walk across the room. He was using a cane, a sleek piece of mahogany I had carved for him myself. He still had a limp. The nerve damage in his left leg from the prolonged use of restraints and sedatives would never fully go away. Dr. Thorne had made sure of that. But Nash didn't hide the limp. He didn't try to mask the click-clack of the cane against the floor. He wore it like a medal. It was the rhythm of his survival. He stopped to talk to a new arrival, a young man with a bruised jaw and terror in his eyes, clutching a backpack like it was a shield. I saw Nash place a hand on the boy's shoulder. I saw him lean in and say something that made the boy's shoulders drop 2 inches. I knew what Nash was saying. He was saying, "I believe you." That was the motto of the foundation. We didn't call it a shelter. Men have too much pride for shelters. We called it a workshop, a place to rebuild. When we used the crypto money to buy this place, people told us we were crazy. They said domestic abuse against men wasn't a real issue. They said men should be tough. They said we were wasting our fortune. But then the doors opened. And they came. They came at night wearing sunglasses to hide black eyes. They came with stories of wives who threw boiling water, girlfriends who threatened false police reports, partners who drained bank accounts and isolated them from their children. They were doctors, mechanics, teachers, and soldiers. They were all different, but they all had the same look in their eyes that Nash had in Shady Oaks. The look of a man who is screaming in a soundproof room. Nash wasn't just the financier. He was the heart. He led the group sessions. He, the man who couldn't remember his own password a year ago, was now the clearest voice in the room. He used his engineering brain to help them reconstruct their lives. He helped them secure their digital assets, lock down their credit, and navigate the legal system that so often assumes the man is always the aggressor. I turned away from the balcony and walked into the break room to make coffee. The TV was on low volume, tuned to the local news. I usually kept it off, but today was a special day. Today was sentencing day. I poured a cup of black coffee and looked at the screen. The anchor woman, looking serious and grim, was speaking over a graphic that showed a mugshot. Tiffany Carter. She didn't look like the woman in the red dress anymore. Her hair was cut short, likely due to lice or prison regulations. Her face was gaunt, stripped of makeup and fillers. But it was her eyes that told the real story. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hard, bitter vacancy. The headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. 25 years. No possibility of parole for 15. The reporter's voice filled the small room. In a statement read by the judge, Tiffany Carter was described as a predator of the highest order, a woman who weaponized the legal system and the medical profession to dismantle her own family for profit. The jury took less than 2 hours to return a guilty verdict on all counts. I took a sip of coffee. It tasted bitter but clean. The report cut to footage of Tiffany being led out of the courthouse. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit, shackles on her ankles. She tried to shout something at the cameras, something about being framed, about a conspiracy, but she was shoved forward by a female bailiff who clearly had no patience for her. Then the reporter added a detail that made me set my cup down. Sources inside the state penitentiary report that Ms. Carter has already been involved in altercations with other inmates. Her attempts to bribe guards and manipulate cell assignments were met with hostility from the general population. She sustained a broken nose and severe bruising in an incident in the cafeteria yesterday. It appears the former socialite is finding that her status holds no currency behind bars. I turned the TV off. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel like cheering. I just felt a quiet, heavy sense of balance being restored. Tiffany had spent her life hurting people she viewed as beneath her. Now she was at the bottom of the world, learning the hard way that gravity applies to everyone. She wanted to be treated like royalty, but in prison, arrogance is just a target painted on your back. I washed my cup and dried it. I didn't need to see anymore. She was the past. I had work to do in the future. I walked down the hall to the executive office. It was a glass-walled room at the back of the building filled with servers and monitors. This was the nerve center of the foundation. It was where we tracked the finances, secured the communications for our clients, and monitored the security systems. Sitting behind the main desk was a young man in a crisp button-down shirt. He was typing furiously, a headset over one ear. He looked professional. He looked sharp. He looked nothing like the scared kid in a delivery uniform who had handed me a package of peaches in terror a year ago. Dante looked up as I entered. He pulled off his headset and smiled. "Hey, Mr. Carter. I just finished encrypting the new client database, and I traced that offshore account for the client in room 4. We found the money. His ex-wife tried to hide it in a shell company in Panama, but she left a digital footprint the size of a Yeti. We got her." "Good work, son," I said, sitting down in the chair opposite him. "You have a gift. You see patterns where other people just see noise." Dante shrugged, looking a little embarrassed. "I just learned from the best. Nash taught me the code, but you taught me how to read people." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. It wasn't a subpoena this time. It was heavy parchment paper bound with a blue ribbon. "Dante," I said, "we need to talk about your position here." Dante's smile faltered. He sat up straighter. "Is something wrong? Did I mess up the server?" "I can fix it. I know I was late on Tuesday, but—" "You didn't mess up," I interrupted. "But there is a problem with your title." "My title?" he asked. "Head of Security and IT. Is it too much?" "I can just be the IT guy." "No," I said, sliding the envelope across the desk. "It is not enough." Dante looked at the envelope. He looked at me. He reached out slowly and opened it. He pulled out the documents. He read the header. "Petition for adult adoption and legal change of name." He froze. He read it again. His lips moved silently as he scanned the paragraphs. The document stated that Reginald Carter and Nash Carter wished to formally recognize Dante Williams as a legal member of the family with full rights of inheritance and decision-making power within the Carter estate and the foundation. Dante dropped the paper. His hands were shaking. "Mr. Carter," he whispered, I don't understand. I am just the delivery guy. I am just the kid from the neighborhood. You are the man who drove a van into a burning building." I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You are the man who dug through trash to find the truth. You are the man who sat in a basement and fed my son water when he couldn't hold a cup." I stood up and walked around the desk. "Tiffany was family by law, and she tried to kill us. You were a stranger, and you saved us. I learned a long time ago that you don't choose who you are related to, but you do choose your family. And Nash and I, we chose you." Dante stood up. Tears were streaming down his face. He wiped them away with his sleeve, sniffing loudly. "Does Nash know?" he asked. It was his idea. I smiled. He said he is tired of being an only child, and he said he needs a brother who actually knows how to fish because Lord knows I am terrible at it. Dante laughed a wet, choking sound. He came around the desk and hugged me. It wasn't a polite hug, it was a desperate, bone-crushing embrace. I held him tight, patting his back. I felt the same way I did when I held Nash as a baby. I felt the circle closing. "Welcome home, Dante Carter," I whispered. We walked out of the office together. Nash was waiting for us in the hallway. He saw Dante's red eyes and the papers in his hand. He didn't say anything. He just grinned and held out his hand. Dante ignored the hand and pulled him into a hug too. 3 men, a father, a son, and a brother, standing in a building built on pain but filled with hope. "Let's get back to work," Nash said, clapping Dante on the shoulder. "We have a new intake at 4 o'clock. A guy from Savannah. His wife threatened to take his kids if he didn't sign over his business." I nodded. "Then let's go help him fight." I watched them walk down the hall, arguing good-naturedly about who was going to run the intake interview. Nash limped, and Dante walked with a bounce in his step. They looked like they could take on the world. And me. I am just the mailman. I delivered the package. I survived the storm. And now, I get to watch the garden grow. I walked to the front door of the foundation and flipped the sign from closed to open. Outside, the sun was shining on the streets of Atlanta. It was a bright, clear day. A good day to build something new. A good day to be alive. The snow was falling softly on the streets of Atlanta, dusting the rooftops of the West End with a layer of pristine white. It was a rare Christmas snow, the kind that shuts down the city and forces everyone to stay inside. But inside the Carter house, we didn't mind being trapped. For the first time in years, the walls weren't closing in on us. They were holding us together. I stood in the doorway of the dining room, wiping my hands on an old dish towel. The air smelled of roasted turkey sage stuffing, and the sweet caramelized scent of sweet potatoes, my late wife's secret recipe that I had finally managed to replicate. There were no caterers in the kitchen today. There were no waiters in white gloves passing around hors d'oeuvres that looked like art, but tasted like cardboard. There was just us. The table wasn't set with the fine china Tiffany had prized so highly. That had all been sold or shattered in her final rage. We were eating off a mismatched set of plates we had picked up at a thrift store, and the napkins were paper, not linen. But as I looked around the room, I realized that this table was richer than any banquet I had ever attended. Leo was sitting on the floor near the fireplace, trying to teach Dante how to play a new video game. The boy who used to wear suits and sit with his hands folded was now wearing a pair of flannel pajamas with cartoon bears on them. His hair was messy. There was a smudge of chocolate on his cheek. He was laughing a loud, uninhibited belly laugh that filled the room. "You are cheating." Dante laughed, mashing buttons on the controller. "How are you beating me?" "I work in IT. It is called skill." Uncle Dante, Leo crowed. "Get used to it." "Uncle Dante." The words hung in the air, warm and right. Dante looked up at me and grinned, a look of pure contentment on his face. He wasn't the delivery boy anymore. He wasn't the orphan from the neighborhood. He was a Carter. And then there was Nash. My son was in the kitchen carving the turkey. He was humming a jazz tune, the knife moving rhythmically through the meat. He still leaned on his cane when he stood for too long, but his hands were steady. The tremors were gone. The hollow, haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet strength. He had gained 20 pounds in the last year, and the suit he wore, a simple wool blazer, fit him perfectly. He looked up and caught me watching him. "Everything okay, Dad?" he asked. "Everything is perfect, son," I said. We sat down to eat. The food was simple. The turkey was a little dry on one side, and the mashed potatoes had a few lumps because Leo had insisted on mashing them himself. But to me, it tasted like manna from heaven. We passed the bowls around, talking over each other, sharing stories about the foundation, about the fishing trip we were planning for the spring, about nothing and everything. There was no tension, no one was checking their phone, no one was wondering if they were being recorded or judged. The empty chair at the end of the table, the spot where Tiffany used to hold court like a queen, was gone. We had removed it. The circle was smaller now, but it was unbroken. As the meal wound down, Nash tapped his glass with a fork. The room went quiet. Leo put down his fork. Dante leaned back in his chair. Nash stood up. He gripped the edge of the table for a moment to steady himself, then straightened his spine. He looked at Dante, then at Leo, and finally he rested his gaze on me. "I want to propose a toast," Nash said, his voice raspy but clear. He picked up his glass. It wasn't filled with expensive wine. It was filled with apple cider. "To new traditions," he began. and to the people who saved me when I couldn't save myself. He looked at Dante. To my brother who drove into the fire, he looked at Leo. To my son who reminded me that I had a reason to fight, and then he looked at me. His eyes welled up with tears shining in the soft light of the chandelier. And to my father he said, his voice cracking slightly, "For 4 years I was a ghost. I was erased." Everyone believed the story she told. The doctors, the lawyers, the neighbors. Even I started to believe it. But you were the stubborn old mailman who refused to accept the letter was undeliverable. He took a deep breath. "Thank you, Dad. Thank you for not believing the sweet lies. Thank you for seeing the truth when it was buried under a mountain of deception." I felt a lump in my throat the size of a fist. I stood up slowly, my joints popping, and raised my own glass. "I didn't do anything special, Nash," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I didn't believe the words because words are easy. Anyone can write a script. But a father knows his son's heart. I knew that the man in that video wasn't you. I trusted my intuition because it was the only thing I had left." I looked around the table. "We lost a lot of years," I said. "We lost a lot of sleep. But look at what we found." I gestured to the room, to the warmth, to the family. "We found us. And that is a fortune no one can steal." We clinked glasses. The sound was bright and clear. Leo cheered. Dante clapped Nash on the back. After dinner, we moved to the living room. The fire was crackling in the hearth, casting long dancing shadows on the walls. Leo fell asleep on the rug, his head resting on Dante's lap. Nash sat in the armchair reading a book, his cane resting against his knee. I walked to the window and looked out. The snow was falling harder now, blanketing the world in silence. The streetlights flickered on, illuminating the path to our front door, a path that was no longer blocked by police tape or fear. I thought about Tiffany sitting in a cold cell somewhere, surrounded by strangers who didn't care about her name or her money. I thought about the Vances sitting in their museum of a house protecting assets that would never love them back. And then I looked at my reflection in the glass. I saw an old man with gray hair and wrinkles. But I didn't see a victim. I saw a guardian. I saw a man who had walked through the fire and carried his family out the other side. I turned back to the room. This was my masterpiece. Not the house, not the money in the crypto wallet, but this moment, this peace. I sat down on the sofa and closed my eyes, listening to the crackle of the fire and the steady breathing of my family. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was just home. And as the camera of my mind zoomed out, pulling away from the warm glow of the living room window, rising above the snow-covered roof and drifting up into the dark winter sky, I knew one thing for sure. The package had been delivered. The journey was over. And the Carter family was finally truly free. Evil rarely announces itself with horns and a pitchfork. Sometimes it arrives with a warm smile, a freshly baked pie, and a plausible excuse. We are taught that family is a sanctuary, but blind loyalty is a dangerous narcotic. My son paid for his trust with 4 years of his life. I almost paid with mine. Vigilance isn't paranoia. It is the highest form of love. When the stories don't match the reality, stop listening to the words and start tracking the actions. The truth doesn't need a passport to travel, it just needs one brave person to open the package. Thank you for walking this road with me. If this story touched your heart, or if it reminded you to hug your loved ones a little tighter tonight, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us share these stories with more people who might need to hear them. And I want to know from you, have you ever had a gut feeling that saved you from a bad situation? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and never stop fighting for your family.